Otaku in the Marvel DC Universe. Hey, fanfic family. So glad to see you here again to continue this incredible adventure. As always, kindly remember, this story is 100% fiction, so don't go looking for dimensional portals in your closet. All rights to this fantastic novel belong to the original author. We're just your humble narrators of epic tales. Are you enjoying the fanfic? Show it by subscribing to our YouTube channel and dropping us a like. And if you're impatient for more exclusive content, our Patreon is your happy place. Chapter 126 Sword and Armor. Setting aside the system's task for the moment, Liang Yue focused his attention on the well-made armor he was wearing and the long sword at his waist. He was already getting used to receiving a set of gear from the system each time he entered a world for training, and he had come prepared this time as well. He had deliberately changed into some homeware he'd bought when he first arrived in New York City, clothes that had long since been relegated to the bottom of his closet due to his rapid change in size. Loose pink cotton shorts, a black t-shirt, and bare feet had been exchanged for a set of high-quality full-body armor. This was a steal. System, where did this armor come from? Don't tell me you conjured it out of thin air. Ding. A trial work from the 49-slot toolbox, consuming some iron ingots, leather, and cloth from the host storage space, and you have guts. You've even learned to take things without asking. Was this sword made the same way? Yes. Before descending into this hobbit world, the item upgrade treasure charm that Liang Yue had bought for 1,000 points had finally not gone to waste. Although the upgrade process had been a bit nerve-wracking, in the end, his original 36-slot toolbox had managed to complete the upgrade, albeit with some difficulty opening the storage space interface. With a thought, Liang Yue removed the chest armor piece from the upper body slot and his equipment column at the same time. The upper body armor that had been gleaming in the reflection of the lava firelight instantly disappeared from his body and appeared in his hand. Liang Yue's upper body was now only clad in a large red, frilled collar, wide sleeved shirt with a touch of gothic style. The armor in front of him was indeed a masterpiece of alchemy from the upgraded 49-slot toolbox. It was seamlessly integrated, without any welding or stitching marks, made entirely of bright iron and leather, so much so that Liang Yue even began to suspect that even if ordinary people got this armor, it would be difficult to wear because the correct way to wear this thing is to put it directly in the equipment bar. In addition, the armor didn't look like a mass-produced product. Every joint and muscle area on it had a beautiful streamlined shape. However, the surface of the armor was not a completely smooth metal product either. Each turning point and transition of each part seemed to be cut from dozens of diamond-shaped sections like delicate scales. Each one was almost precise, thick, and exquisite, making one marvel at the beauty of the craftsmanship. In comparison, the Mech's original iron armor, whose shape could be compared to Tony Stark's Mark I, which was hammered out of a pile of scraps in a cave in Afghanistan, had almost no comparability with the armor in front of him. If the two sets of armor were placed together, probably no one would believe that they were actually a series of products compared to the armor in front of him. Liang Yue wasn't very satisfied with the other item the system had given him this time, the thick long sword, also from the 49-slot toolbox. First of all, there was definitely no problem with the workmanship of this sword. Its overall shape was a widened, thickened, and lengthened 8-sided Han sword, also surrounded by diamond-shaped forged surfaces. The sword weighed about 40 or 50 pounds, and the sword's surface even had inverted triangular blood grooves in the tavern. Before Liang Yue was able to horizontally slash the 4 mercenaries and the weapons in their hands with one blow, which, in addition to showing that he himself was strong enough, the role of this sword could not be underestimated. Unfortunately, after a long period of swordplay practice, Liang Yue had gradually formed his own set of habits and sword-using concepts appropriately. I have to add a little arc, which is more conducive to cutting. The thickness and width of the blade should also be increased a little, otherwise it will be too light to hold in the hand, and you won't be able to use any force. Another thing is that the hilt must be made a little longer, in this way, in the toolbox that is 7 squares horizontally and vertically. The hilt will take up 2 squares, and the remaining 5 squares are the blade, and then the width must be in this way. With Liang Yue's wholehearted investment and research, the first night of coming to this hobbit world quickly passed. In the morning, when the distant morning light penetrated the clouds and shone the golden sunlight on the earth, Liang Yue also woke up from his cultivation state. After slightly moving his hands and feet and doing some warm-up exercises, he took out his new style dual swords and continued to practice the Hangshan sword manual. In fact, he didn't spend much time on the research of the new style dual swords last night. After all, Liang Yue was using the alchemy attached to the toolbox to synthesize items. not really forging swords with hammers on a stove and anvil, and the efficiency between the two naturally could not be compared at this time. The dual swords in his hand, looking at the shape alone, are actually more like two scaled-down versions of Mao as Liang Yue had previously envisioned. The width and thickness of the sword had been increased, and the edge of the blade had a slight arc. The overall forging process has been upgraded again compared to the previous +3 toolbox. The whole body is silver and bright, and the surface is covered with diamond-shaped forged surfaces. With a gentle wave, Liang Yue suddenly had the illusion that he could cut through the air. The weight of a single sword is about 24 or 5 pounds. It still feels a little light when Liang Yue holds it in his hand and wields it, but there is no way around it. In his own opinion, the ordinary metal forging material of iron has almost reached some kind of extreme under the synthetic application of the toolbox. In the next step, even if Liang Yue upgrades the toolbox again and has the space to add more details to the synthesized weapons, he may not be able to essentially improve the quality of the weapon's various alloy materials, and combined matching with other types of metals are the main directions for his future exploration. Ding-a-ling. After practicing swordsmanship for more than an hour, and taking a refreshing bath with Mix Infinite water source, just as Liang Yue was holding a thick beefcake in one hand and a large glass of milk in the other, eating breakfast, a crisp ringing sound suddenly slowly came from the road not far away. Liang Yue looked in the direction of the sound, and saw Gandalf wearing a large grey robe and a pointed hat, riding a tall white horse, slowly passing by on the muddy path. When their eyes met, Gandalf politely took off his hat and nodded to Liang Yue with a smile. Liang Yue, on the other hand, raised the milk glass in his hand to the old man afterwards. The two passed by each other without any substantial interaction. Chapter 127 Valley Black Market. Where should I buy a map? He Knight, although I don't know what the countries in your eastern world are like, selling maps is illegal here. If you really want to slay a dragon, the Lonely Mountain, where the Dwarven Kingdom's capital is located, is definitely visible if you just head west from the town. But if you want to buy some rare items along the way, the black market in this town is your best choice. You might be able to buy a map there. Is that so? Thank you, old Dick. You're welcome. I wish you a good journey. Also, do you really not need me, old man, to prepare some food for you? Considering your generosity, no need. By the way, have any dwarves passed through the town recently? Indeed, a few dwarves have come through. They left towards the south of the town. Following that direction, you'll pass through a forest, and beyond that is a range of hills. I heard that a group of hobbits is hidden deep in the hills, but very few people can find them. Following the tip from the one-eyed tavern owner, Liang Yue quickly found the location of the town's black market. Calling it a black market, it's actually more like a semi-public trading market, located outside the town, in a small valley in the woods. The people coming and going are mostly townspeople, with only a few rangers or mercenaries passing through, each holding weapons in their hands. Obviously, these shouldn't be clean goods. To a large extent, they might be stolen goods that can't be seen in the light. Besides that, at a stall selling animal cubs, Liang Yue even saw two creatures in an iron cage that looked a bit like bald monkeys, shivering in the sunlight. Thanks to the convenience of language mastery, he could even understand their conversations. According to the stall owner's introduction, these were actually a pair of goblins. Give me some of every kind of seed in your store. In front of him was a traveling caravan composed of more than a dozen carriages, which seemed to specialize in grain trading, and might also carry some private goods. Liang Yue roughly looked at the types of grains they were selling, and after confirming that some of the crops were ones he hadn't seen in reality, he directly reached out and handed the boss of this caravan half a gold ingot with a smooth cut surface. This was a sin he committed last night when testing his new weapon Knight. This piece of gold is enough to buy half of our caravan's goods. The boss was a well-groomed fat man, and the clothes on his body were obviously better than those of the townspeople. At this time, the man was holding half a gold ingot with both hands, his mouth almost reaching the roots of his ears, and then pretended to be reserved and said to him, "Pack a small bag of each kind of seed. If there are any rare varieties, I will pay separately as you wish, Knight. Our caravan travels all year round between several peace-loving races, and we basically have all the crop seeds that can be found on the market here." Since your caravan has been traveling all over the place, you should have a map, right? Of this, we do have a map, but the price, generally speaking, gold is indeed a precious metal, but when there are too many of them, this precious metal completely becomes a pure forging material in Liang Yue's eyes. Therefore, as long as it can help him complete the training task, he will not feel bad even if he spends more. Furthermore, he is indeed going to slay a dragon this time, and as the last dragon in Middle-earth. Smog's lair is now set in the treasure room of the dwarves' former capital palace. There, piles of gold coins, gold ingots, gold and silver utensils, weapons and armor, gems, and even various metal ingots are simply countless. Once successful, how much he wants to take is up to his own will. This breed of cattle doesn't seem to be very ordinary. Pure white skin. These are authentic calves brought out from the dwarven territory. I haven't heard of the specific breed, but their meat is particularly tender and juicy when they grow up. Unfortunately, there was some turbulence on the road, and many died. Now there are only these 5 left. What about this sheep? Although this kind of sheep is similar to mountain goats in terms of breed, this kind of sheep is actually a strong branch carefully selected by the dwarves after years of cultivation. Knight, you must have heard of it. The dwarves have a kind of goat cavalry, which is raised from childhood. With this kind of sheep you can get even these important military mount cubs. I'm not afraid to tell you, since the dwarven kingdom fell, their clan has been having a very bad time. If they can't do business with us, they might starve to death. A lot of people. Well, then bring all these cattle and sheep over to me, no problem. Knight. Oh, by the way, our caravan also has the most authentic elven-made jewelry. Do you want it? Not interested. Understood. You wait a moment. After paying the money and sending the purchased cattle, sheep, and various rare items into the stronghold world in front of this caravan, and a group of people secretly watching, Liang Yue slowly left the valley black market under the awe and shock of the surrounding people in this shopping trip. This guy also successfully achieved his previous goals. Not only did he get a simple map of Middle-earth, but also, under his cost-no object spending spree, he unexpectedly gained a batch of goods that he thought were very valuable. For example, those not-so-ordinary cattle and sheep, Middle-earth's characteristic plant crop seeds, and a metal ingot called mithril. This mithril is said to be a very rare associated metal, and it is generally difficult for ordinary people to obtain it. It is said that it is because its refining process is a bit special. This metal itself has extremely excellent properties, and in some novel worlds, it can even be used to greatly increase the power of magic. According to the normal plot development, the protagonist of this world, the hobbit Bilbo Baggins, was once given a well-made mithril breastplate by the dwarven Prince Thorn in the dwarven capital, and its defensive power was very amazing. Liang Yue also spent twice the weight of this mithril ingot in gold to get it from an inconspicuous second-hand weapon merchant. In addition, Liang Yue also purchased a batch of second-hand arrows with excellent production technology and 3 elegant standard elven longbows from the weapon merchant. In addition, on the weapon merchant's stall, there were also several standard armors of the elven army. However, those were obviously things taken off dead people, and Liang Yue was not interested. Chapter 128 Enchantment. After leaving the black market, Liang Yue didn't rashly take action. Instead, he returned to his stone house in the suburbs and began studying the map in his hand. First of all, I definitely can't leave the dwarves group to act alone. After all, the plot revolves around them, and only by following them can I get the maximum gain. Then, the plan to rush to the hobbit gathering area and break Bilbo Baggins's leg in advance is probably no longer feasible. Gandalf and the dwarves should have arrived there one after another by now. Currently, I don't have any connection with those dwarves, so I can't rashly go up and join them, lest I be suspected. Fortunately, I still have the title of Dragon Slayer, which adds a lot of rationality to my actions. Right, what adventures will these dwarves have on their way to the Lonely Mountain? Besides getting the One Ring under the Goblin settlement, they also seem to have found the treasure of the trolls along the way, and then got 3 weapons. It is said that they were made by the elven race of the First Age, and they seem to be quite famous. One is a sword called Orcrist, obtained by Thorin, and the other is a sword called Glamdring, obtained by Gandalf. Then, this wizard started the mode of melee mage. There was also an named dagger, which Gandalf gave to Bilbo Baggins for self-defense. Looking at it this way, first of all, the One Ring must be obtained. Getting that ring is equivalent to mastering the life and death of Sauron, the big boss of Middle-earth in the Lord of the Rings plot on the later Hobbit period. It was the destruction of this ring that directly enabled the human alliance to win the victory. Speaking of which, in the proper plot, the One Ring has to be taken to Mount Doom, and then destroyed with a lava there. But since it's all lava, I wonder if it's okay not to go to Mount Doom. Thinking of this, Liang Yue couldn't help but raise his eyes from the map and glanced at the lava stove in front of him that was constantly tumbling. It's all lava. Although he doesn't know what the difference is between his lava and the lava on Mount Doom. If the latter's lava is special and possesses some kind of abnormal power, Then his own lava from the McWorld is also not simple. The characteristic of infinite lava makes each unit of lava in the McWorld able to form a source on its own. In addition to being able to flow lava around to a limited extent, it can also release endless heat, ensuring that it never goes out in its natural state. Such an infinite characteristic is definitely not ordinary. However, let's put the matter of destroying the One Ring aside for now. Even if my infinite lava can't melt it at that time, I can just make another trip to Mount Doom, but even after getting that ring, I can't destroy it immediately. After all, besides Soren, there are still the 9 ring wraiths by the Dark Lord's side. Those 9 guys, it is said that each of them is not a simple character, and each of them had their own deeds before they were alive. They should also be considered monster bosses, right? In addition, it is best to get those 3 weapons. I am very curious about the craftsmanship of those elves. Among them, Orcrist and Glamdring are said to have killed many orcs, but after hundreds or thousands of years, they can still remain in perfect condition. This elven forging technique is a bit too outrageous. The magic runes they attach to those 3 swords are quite interesting. Once an orc approaches, they will automatically glow. I have to take them back and study them home, but since we're talking about enchanting, it seems that there is also this system in the McWorld, right? Thinking of this, Liang Yue couldn't help but turn his hand and took out his 2 new battle swords from the storage space. Then, this guy moved his mind, and a blue vortex suddenly appeared out of thin air in the half-air on the side. Immediately afterwards, a storage box fell out of this vortex. Opening the box, it turned out to be filled with a large pile of magic books surrounding an unusual halo. Liang Yue had not performed any actual operations on the enchanting mechanism in the McWorld before, because it was completely unnecessary with his increasingly powerful strength and the high-quality weapons created by the upgraded toolbox, the zombies, skeleton archers, and self-destructing monsters in the Stronghold world could not pose much threat to him at all. After all, they were originally monsters that could be killed with 1 sword, so why waste these enchanting resources? First of all, we are going to hunt dragons after all. Although Smog can only be regarded as the bottom of the dragon clan, he can still breathe fire, so the fire protection spell is very necessary. I remember that I was lucky before and seemed to have made a level 5 fire protection. Right, there really is one. I'll put it on pants later. Then, to deal with the 9 ring wraiths under Soren, the Smite magic book is also very important. Sure enough, there are 8 level 5 smites in the box. Although the undead creatures in Mick mainly only include skeletons, zombies, and withers, those 9 ring wraiths should also belong to undead creatures, right? There are also several books of magic sealed with sharpness. It is said that this spell cannot coexist with Smite, but Smite can only target undead creatures, while the former is more universal. So, in order to kill orcs more efficiently, I have to make 2 extra swords to enchant with sharpness magic. In addition, Sweeping Edge seems to fit my sword habits very well. Then there's Thorns Unbreaking Looting Projectile Protection. Yes, this spell is also very important, used to defend against enemies using bows and arrows to sneak attacks. Although under normal circumstances, archers will definitely not be able to hurt me, but if you are trapped in an army of thousands of horses, it is hard to say. Speaking of, should I add a fire aspect to the 2 swords that have been sharpened? With the 2 swords of the undead killer, it seems very necessary, right? The knockback spell, if used in battles with orc armies. By the way, the mending spell seems to be also once he fell into the vortex of enchanting, Liang Yue began to become a little bit out of control, just like before. When this guy first came into contact with authentic martial arts secrets, he was quite oblivious to food and sleep and unaware of the passage of time. In this way, 3 days passed unknowingly in his state when the figures of the dwarves and Gandalf riding forward finally appeared within the 10-kilometer coverage of the fully automatic voice-activated camera. Liang Yue had no choice but to break away from this state of immersion. After packing his luggage, the enchanted armor was neatly put on, and 2 newly made blank-bowed standard long swords were placed in the usual position in the storage space. Then, this guy walked out of the stone house, chasing after the direction of the dwarves, following them from a distance of 7 or 8 miles, unhurriedly. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 129, Crossing the River with a Reed. The main body was round, like a soccer ball, with a lens and monitor diagonally opposite each other on either side of the sphere, and a seemingly simple bamboo dragonfly-style wing on top. This was the all-terrain, fully automatic, voice-activated camcorder that someone had bought for 1,000 points, which had eliminated the pixel module display design and could focus on any scene within a 10-kilometer radius. Moreover, just by basking in the sun, it could achieve a balance between power supply and demand. As soon as this item was put on the shelves, Liang Yue realized its precious value, although he didn't understand the operating principle that maintained its focusing and camera functions. He didn't need to worry about that at all as long as it works right. On the way, relying on the spherical camera in his hand, Liang Yue monitored Thorn's dwarf expeditionary squad in real time while wandering around the periphery of the team. He always maintained a safe distance of 6 or 7 kilometers from them, which could guarantee harmony between the two sides, and also allow him to provide rescue at critical moments, or to seize their opportunities along the way one step ahead without anyone noticing. This camera, which was about the size of a soccer ball, naturally had good flying ability, as well as a tracking and positioning device, which could ensure that it maintained contact with the user at all times, whether in flight or underwater. But Liang Yue felt that he didn't need to turn on these functions at all now. Holding it in his hand could also achieve all the operations, and it was also convenient to check the display, and it saves power. Unlike Thorin, Gandalf, and the others who were riding horses, Liang Yue was relying on his own 2 feet to travel. After the system's time acceleration, the horses in the stronghold world had already formed a scale, but he abandoned them. Now it was to exercise his own skills and techniques as much as possible. Liang Yue identity, acquired martial artist, internal strength, 1,678 strength, 71 agility, 81 constitution, 79 spirit, 92 bloodline, human, sealed, primordial unity skill level, 410 current level, 4 authentic Taoist internal cultivation method, one of the 9 skills of Mount Hui. Its roots can be traced back to the Quanzhan Taoist lineage. Skill effect, internal strength plus 1,678 strength plus 10 agility plus 7 spirit plus 35 physical and magical defense plus 377 elemental resistance plus 18 proficiency. 3,127 5,000 skill effect, sword attack power plus 397 sword accuracy plus 8% attack speed plus 8% subtraction attack power plus 3% proficiency. 611 1,000 crossing the river on a reed level. 310 current level. 3A lightness skill passed down by Bodhidharma of Shaolin. It is said that when cultivated to the highest level, one can cross the rivers and lakes with a reed. Skill effect, jumping power plus 8% movement speed plus 8% agility plus 13 constitution plus 7 mid-air movement speed plus 5%, requires consumption of internal strength, proficiency. 751 1,000. I don't know if it's because the energy attributes in the air of this hobbit world are more active, and there is a system of magic and other mysterious sides. Since Liang Yue came here, the efficiency of cultivation has also been improved a lot. Without knowing it, his cultivation is still the same as before. How he practiced in the stronghold world, he is still doing it as usual. But the effects produced between the two places are indeed quite different. This difference is especially reflected in the two skills, primordial unity skill and crossing the river on a reed, which involve internal cultivation techniques. Needless to say, primordial unity skill was originally an authentic internal cultivation method in the Taoist lineage, and what it mainly cultivates is internal strength and crossing the river on a reed. This lightness skill actually also involves the exercise of internal cultivation techniques, and forms its own unique operating system. The first 2 levels of this Buddhist lightness skill are considered the normal basic entry stage of the skill, only involving some steps and the exercise of body usage skills. But once this skill is promoted to the 3rd level, it will officially enter the field of internal power application. Therefore, on the system panel, a new mid-air movement attribute will be added, and a certain amount of internal strength needs to be consumed to activate it. The real reason for this is that when this lightness skill is cultivated to the 3rd level, a meridian will be opened in each of the cultivator's legs under the urging of internal strength. It will produce a short-term, similar to double jump, mid-air movement effect. After having this brand new fresh experience, coupled with his physical fitness far surpassing ordinary people, Liang Yue even had the illusion of daring to compete with the heavens for height for a while previously, in the stronghold world, unless it was necessary. Otherwise, under normal circumstances, this guy had always been using the method of walking on walls when going up and down the library. Of course, due to the initial lack of proficiency in using lightness skills, facing the height difference of more than 60 meters, Liang Yue would consume about 1/2 of his total internal strength every time he walked back and forth. This made him sigh that his cultivation was insufficient and he needed to work harder, and he also deeply felt the importance of having abundant internal strength. So, When he discovered that the environment of the Hobbit world in front of him seemed to have an extraordinary boosting effect on his cultivation, Liang Yue also secretly made a decision, that is, to use the advantages of this world as quickly as possible to improve the cultivation of internal strength and lightness skills to a higher level, step brush. In the quiet jungle, Liang Yue at this time seemed to have transformed into a light leopard. He leaped up, stepping on the tree trunks, wading through the vines, the whole person constantly shuttling between the cluttered trees. He was like a shadow, walking between the sunlight and the shadows of the trees, light and agile, going high and low, rising and falling, and in a few breaths, he had already crossed the uneven hills and streams. He was like a gust of wind, leaping and turning, accompanied by falling leaves, racing with flying birds, leaving only a faint sound of wind wherever he passed. The branches waved to him, the petals danced for him, and the beams of light from the dense branches were rippling colorfully for him at this moment. He spun, he jumped, he closed his eyes. Then, without being able to continue this unrestrained posture for a moment, he stopped standing on a sturdy tree trunk, his chest heaving. He kept panting. There was no way. Although his physical fitness could cover the seemingly carefree, but actually energy-consuming exercise, Liang Yue's internal strength could not last too long under the drag of this little short leg. This guy can only slowly adjust and adapt, and then look forward to its growth and continuous flowering and fruiting. Although Liang Yue at this time has made great progress compared to the time when he first practiced crossing the river on a reed, internal strength will always only decrease the more it is used. Unless you can get a legendary Lingbo micro step, then you can ensure that the internal strength does not decrease but increases in the process of performing lightness skills. Otherwise, you can only honestly grind a little bit, but it's also good. Although crossing the river on a reed consumes internal strength quickly, primordial unity skill replenishes it not slowly, especially in this plane. The internal strength that originally took 2 or 3 hours to fill up in the stronghold world can now be done in less than half an hour. The difference between this is simply too great. And in this back and forth, I'm not just doing useless work, the proficiency of the skill has also been rising steadily. This feeling is so cool. Chapter 131st Encounter with Orcs. Following this pattern, they proceeded with intermittent stops, all the while being discreetly filmed by a camera crew. Although Thorn and his company of dwarves were on horseback, their travel speed wasn't significantly faster than Liang Yue's, as the route from the town towards the Lonely Mountain led through vast mountainous and forested regions similar to what was depicted in the movies. The scenery along the way was breathtakingly beautiful, almost surreal, with every aspect reminiscent of a Western oil painting in its composition and texture. Liang Yue even began to suspect that each scene along their journey had been meticulously designed. However, a mountain road is still a mountain road. Upon entering the dense forest, there were no more paths to follow, requiring them to traverse the terrain, their feet sinking deep with each step despite having to pause periodically to breathe, gather energy, and replenish his internal power. Liang Yue managed to keep pace with the dwarves, often even taking the lead amidst this silent tug of war. Time flew by swiftly. Night arrived, accompanied by a gentle breeze. A crescent moon slowly ascended into the sky, casting a veil of white upon the dark night. After a full day of monotonous travel, Thorin's company had crossed the forest and climbed onto an open expanse within a range of rolling hills. They lit a bonfire and engaged in casual chatter while consuming the dry rations they carried. Before long, this group of dwarven warriors, along with a shorter, young hobbit, and Gandalfu and the others, lay down haphazardly on the ground, seeking shelter from the winds behind some mountain rocks. Their weary bodies urged them to fall asleep quickly, and the sound of loud snores gradually filled the air. Just then, a long, drawn-out wolf howl echoed from the distant hills. A non-human-like roar followed closely behind, shattering the silence of the night and startling the dwarves who were in a state of half-sleep. Soon, the hobbit, Bilbo Baggins, who was experiencing his first journey away from home and was unfamiliar with the outside world, couldn't help but shiver. Already somewhat troubled and unable to sleep, he couldn't resist asking one of the dwarves who was keeping watch by the fire, "What was that just now? Afterward, they'll even break down the bodies and devour them." A burst of laughter immediately erupted between the two dwarves on watch, clearly intended to scare Bilbo Baggins on his first outing. "Is it that funny?" The deep voice of the dwarven Prince Thorn echoed from the side as he slowly walked over, looking at his two cousins as he spoke. "Do you think an orc raid is a joke? We didn't mean that. That's right, but you know nothing about this world. Don't mind them, lad. Thorin hates orcs for a reason." After the dragon occupied the Lonely Mountain, King Thror tried to reclaim the dwarven kingdom, but the orcs arrived there first. They had formed an alliance with a dragon, an old dwarf with white hair, then recounted their past campaign to Bilbo, His eyes filled with memories and sorrow. Their king was beheaded by Ezek the Defiler, the leader of the orcs, during that battle. Subsequently, Prince Thorin's shield was shattered by the orcs' blow. On the verge of death, Thorin picked up a piece of oak tree trunk as a shield and continued to fight valiantly against the orc leader. Finally, Thorin, consumed by anger and hatred, swung his sword and severed Ezek's arm, scattering the orc army and leading his people to victory in the battle. But the dwarves themselves suffered heavy casualties. They had no strength left to enter the lonely mountain and fight the dragon Smog, and in the end, they had to retreat in disappointment. The name Thorin Oakenshield began to spread widely throughout Middle-earth after this battle. Just as the white-haired dwarf's story was nearing its end, a series of screams suddenly came from afar, one after another. The abrupt screams, roars, and the dying wails of the wolves shattered the original tranquility of the night, echoing through the mountains and hills. But only moments later, the screams abruptly ceased. Slowly, the night regained its silence, but there was a faint, bloody scent in the air. All the dwarven warriors were awakened, and now they stood at the top of the hills, holding their respective weapons, gazing in the direction of the sound with solemn expressions. Gandalf was also standing in the crowd, looking into the depths of the night with his wise and weathered eyes. Unfortunately, in the end, besides the pitch-black mountains and shadows, they found nothing. After a long while, they returned to the bonfire behind the leeward slope, each with a hint of vigilance and doubt in their expressions. On the other side of the hills and cliffs, Liang Yue waved the longsword in his hand, flicking the blood droplets from the blade onto the ground at his feet. Dozens of corpses lay scattered, half of them giant wolves and half of them orcs. Most of the bodies had been cut in half or directly beheaded, and pools of blood flowed together, forming a small lake. The foul, bloody stench gradually rose into the air. Liang Yue looked around, and as his gaze shifted, the slightly cold look in his eyes slowly returned to normal, and the murderous aura gradually subsided. Then, with a flip of his hands, he put the double swords back into his storage space. With a forceful stomp of his foot, his entire being instantly transformed into a gray shadow. Disappearing like lightning into the shadows of the mountain forest above, a round object was flashing with a faint light, rapidly rotating a pair of dragonfly-like wings, closely following his figure as it flew into the distance. Compared to humans, the skin of these orcs is very resilient, their muscles are strong, and the bones in their bodies are also very hard, requiring more force to completely sever their bodies. However, overall, it feels about the same as hacking and killing zombies in the Outpost world, so it's not a big problem. The only difference is that these orc scouts have giant wolf mounts, and they possess intelligence no less than that of humans. And they can form a coordination that is no weaker than that of ancient armies. Melee hacking, ranged arrow ambushes, plus the harassment of giant wolves. Indeed, it's worth noting, on a thick pine tree trunk, Liang Yue had now removed his armor, wearing only a large red inner lining, standing between the branches facing the moonlight. After muttering to himself and summarizing the previous battle, this guy completely calmed the murderous intent in his heart and assumed the standard posture of the Hunil stance. Subconsciously, he glanced again at the screen of the video recorder, which had also landed on the treetop, and then began his unwavering practice of the Hunil Gong. After a while, he completely entered a state of cultivation. His eyes closed gently, and his body relaxed. A clear wind blowing through the hills and the swaying pine tree beneath him could not affect him in the slightest. At this moment, Liang Yue's feet were as if rooted, firmly standing on the tree trunk. No matter how the tree swayed and moved, he could still remain calm. Chapter 131 How should a mage choose skills? The next day, just as dawn broke, a fierce wind swept over the hills, followed closely by a heavy rain. The rain poured down like a waterfall, but in the distant sky, sunlight still pierced through the dark clouds. Rays of light shone through layers of rain and the dense forest above, falling in beams. Walking in such a forest, even the monotonous journey seemed to gain a touch of sacredness. After completing his routine practice, Liang Yue continued to carry the spherical camera, following the dwarves who were several kilometers away, separated by two ridges. During the journey, he soared, he jumped, he shuttled back and forth between the rocks and trees just like yesterday's journey. Relying on his increasingly refined and agile lightness skill, Liang Yue became more and more adept at the journey. Rushing on, it was no longer just a monotonous and tedious adventure, it became a kind of training, and a ladder. Witnessing Liang Yue's self-growth, what made him even more deeply involved and unable to extricate himself was that he could clearly feel this growth himself. There were almost no obstacles, and no so-called shackles of human limits. It seemed that as long as Liang Yue was willing to calm down and carefully hone himself, his body and consciousness would always be in a state of rapid progress. This is probably the greatest benefit I have received after obtaining the system. Right, recalling his previous life, When Liang Yue was just a carefree high school student, he considered himself young and energetic, and habitually shed his sweat and exuberant hormones on the basketball court. However, an occasional intense basketball game made him suddenly realize the cruelty of life, and he grew a lot from it because in this intense confrontation, Liang Yue understood the limits of himself as a human being. He, who had always considered himself to have unlimited potential, could exhaust his physical strength, his muscles could weaken, and his spirit could be sluggish, but predictable growth would always accompany his life. However, at a certain moment in that basketball game, Liang Yue truly realized the upper limit of his body at that time. He still had plenty of physical strength, and all his strength was yet to be exerted, but a certain insurmountable threshold and boundary in the dark made him experience the feeling of deficit and powerlessness for the first time in his life. Although this feeling was quickly compensated for in a few breaths, Liang Yue suddenly realized the end of his body. That invisible sense of restraint made him feel angry and helpless, and instantly gave rise to a sense of apathy at the same time. At the end of Liang Yue's state of mind, there was even a faint trace of inexplicable sadness. However, after being reborn into this life, although the real world is full of crises, Liang Yue has always felt exceptionally satisfied in the depths of his heart, because now, he can clearly feel that the limit that once hindered him has disappeared without knowing it. As long as he is willing to work hard to cultivate and constantly challenge his limits, Liang Yue can always maintain a high-speed progress mode visible to the naked eye. This feeling is simply intoxicating. Soon, the monotonous journey passed by, and a day's time passed by like this. Liang Yue walked and stopped along the way, stepping through the air with lightness skill, freely shuttling between the dense forest and the hills. When his internal strength was exhausted, he stopped to use the mixed yuan gong to breathe and transport internal strength. When he was hungry, he took out a beef pancake from the storage space to fill his stomach. After a day's journey, both his internal strength and lightness skill have made considerable progress, especially for the practice of crossing the river with a reed. It is almost about to break the current restrictions and advance to the 4th level of the exercise. Even Liang Yue, as the person who experienced it, was surprised by the speed of progress. In comparison, the group of dwarves, who were separated from him by several hills, seemed to be having a bit of an unpleasant time at this time. They were in a dilapidated mountain depression, where there was originally a farmer's hut, but now it has been completely abandoned, leaving only ruins in the weeds. However, the dwarves still planned to camp here tonight. Thorn and Gandalf had an argument, and then the two parted ways, and Gandalf left the group and disappeared. Even Liang Yue at this time, after carefully searching every area around with a camera, failed to find the wizard's figure. No wonder he's called Gandalf. That old boy really has some tricks. After searching the display screen for a while, and still not finding it, Liang Yue gave up as a serious servant of God, a demigod-level creature. Gandalf obviously has many secrets and cannot be measured by simple combat power. Of course, if judging from combat power, the level of this old wizard is at most able to draw with the Balrog of Middle-earth, and then die together. So Liang Yue didn't take it too seriously at this time. The sun was gradually setting in the west, and as dusk approached, the light in the forest quickly dimmed. Liang Yue wielded the iron pickaxe at will for a while, and in a short time, he dug out a simple room under a stone cliff. After setting up the magma stove, he began to cook. If he remembered correctly, the orcs would not come to attack Thorn's group of dwarves tonight. Besides the fact that Liang Yue had eliminated a scouting team of orcs last night, temporarily cutting off their source of information, it is even more because the group of dwarves has now come to the territory of several trolls. Trolls are a race that is stronger, taller, and more evil than orcs. Their attributes are more inclined to darkness, and they possess powerful combat power at night, but their brains are very stupid, and once they are extremely hungry, they will eat anything that comes, no matter what it is. Even small-scale orc scouting armies are unwilling to easily provoke them. However, in this Middle-earth world, the weakness of trolls is also very obvious. That is, they are afraid of sunlight, and they are extremely afraid, no less than vampires. Once directly exposed to sunlight, this kind of creature will turn into a stone statue in a short time. Liang Yue found it hard to imagine how trolls with this fatal weakness could gain a foothold in this world. Excuse me, knight from unknown land. Would you mind letting this old man come in and sit for a while? It would be even better if I could have a hearty dinner while I'm at it. Gandalf? Please come in. Chapter 132, Unnamed Meditation. Inside the brightly lit cave, Liang Yue was sitting opposite Gandalf. Between the two of them, various fruits and vegetables were laid out on a magma stove, along with roasted meat, and of course, some of the man's homebrewed wine. To entertain this old wizard, Liang Yue had specially taken out 2 glass goblets, and a bottle of ancient fruit wine, originally from the Stardew Valley world. Oh, this wine is absolutely wonderful. Even the elves couldn't brew such a wine. Besides that, it seems to nourish and purify my body. I can even feel it helping me eliminate toxins from my body. This kind of wine is indeed rare, not to mention the brewing process. The key is that its ingredients are very rare. I see him. I heard that you aspire to slay a dragon, young knight. Yes, Gandalf, and you can call me Liang Yue. Alright, Liang Yue, although it's not clear where you come from. If I remember correctly, the Middle-earth world now seems to have only one dragon left. Yes, it's the evil dragon Smaug, who has seized the Dwarven Kingdom's capital. Then we now have the same goal. Liang Yue, you should know that a Dwarven team also wants to reclaim their homeland from Smaug's hands. Of course, I've been following you all along the way. Then why don't you just join us? I can vouch for you, Liang Yue, and you'll be able to share some of the treasures inside the Dwarven capital with others. I'm not interested in those treasures, Gandalf. I don't lack those things. Alright, I can see that you certainly don't lack those gold, so what do you want? I heard that you are a wizard, Gandalf, one of the few wizards in Middle-earth. If possible, I would like to obtain a method of gathering magic power from you. That's impossible, Liang Yue. The ability to use magic is determined by our few people's talent. This method cannot be taught to others, and I can feel another kind of power from you. It's different from magic, but it's also a righteous natural force, which is why I didn't hesitate to invite you to join our team, Liang Yue. But besides the method of using magic, I don't lack anything. How about this, Liang Yue? The method of gathering magic power really can't be taught to you, because that is my innate ability, and I never care about the reason for having this talent. Liang Yue looked at the scroll in front of him, and without any hesitation, solemnly stretched out his hands and took it from the other party's hand. Of course, Liang Yue would definitely not be stupid enough to immediately comply with whatever the old wizard took out. In fact, the moment Gandalf took out this slightly yellow scroll from his pocket, he had already cast an observation spell on it, unnamed meditation or mental power cultivation secret method created by the demigod Gandalf. Based on his life's experience after learning it, it can passively increase the speed of cultivation of exercises and absorption of the energy of heaven and earth, and can continuously exercise the activity of one's own mental power, increasing the upper limit of energy. It's good that you're satisfied, Liang Yue. Welcome to join our team. Of course, I'm honored. How about I explain the cultivation method of this scroll to you? Okay, thank you. Gandalf is indeed the creator of this meditation technique. When teaching Liang Yue, fearing that he would not understand, he directly started from the source, explaining the operating principle of this magical technique to him, including the difficulties the old wizard encountered during his cultivation, his thoughts and original intentions when creating this meditation technique, etc. The explanation was extremely simple and thorough. In just over 2 hours, Liang Yue had officially started cultivating this meditation technique. This was still because most of the time was spent on Gandalf's explanation and named meditation level 1-5 current level 1A mental power cultivation method created by the demigod Gandalf. Based on his life's experience, exercise effect, energy gathering speed plus 5%, passive, exercise cultivation speed plus 5%, passive, energy plus 1 proficiency. 100. Oh no, what's wrong? Just as Liang Yue had memorized the cultivation method of this meditation technique and was about to formally enter the meditative state, a soft shout suddenly came from Gandalf next to him. Hearing this, Liang Yue immediately woke up, subconsciously frowned, and looked at the old wizard with some regret. Sorry, Liang Yue, I interrupted your meditation, but I think we should hurry to the dwarves. Thorin and them are in trouble. Okay. Saving people is important. After all, hearing Gandalf's words, Liang Yue also subconsciously nodded and got up without any hesitation. After all, protecting the hobbits was also his task. Immediately, he waved his hand and put away the uneaten food on the table, as well as that unit of magma. Please keep that unfinished bottle of ancient fruit wine for me first. I want to save it for later to savor slowly seeing someone's actions. Gandalf, who was leaning on his staff, spoke up to remind him. Hearing this, Liang Yue curved the corners of his mouth, and with a flick of his sleeve, he took out an ancient fruit from his base world, which was all blue and exuded an enticing fragrance. Then, in front of the old wizard, he put the ancient fruit into his toolbar, and when he took it out again, the fruit had already become 4 round seeds. Of course, Gandalf definitely couldn't see Liang Yue's operation process. After all, the other party was not his villager. Under the system's disguise, the old wizard could only see the scene of him turning the fruit into seeds between 1 throw and 1 take. These are the seeds of the ancient fruit. You can take them back and try them. I guess they should be able to be planted alive. As for the wine, I'll send you a few more bottles later. Praise you, Liang Yue. You are truly a generous knight. Chapter 133 Hunting Ogres. Several hours had passed by the time Liang Yue and Gandalf reached the other side of the two stone hills and found the dwarves' tracks. Heaven knows how this old wizard managed to run from one side of the mountain to the other and find him. Moreover, Gandalf hadn't taken long to reach his mountain cave after his quarrel with Thorin. Now, Liang Yue was forced to slow down because he had to take care of the old man, and was delayed by the old wizard's dawdling. If he were traveling alone, he could have crossed the two mountains in less than half an hour with a combined use of his lightness skill and physical strength. Is this old codger doing it on purpose? Liang Yue couldn't help but wonder maliciously as he watched Gandalf, who was crouching in the bushes, silently observing the situation ahead. However, his suspicion wasn't entirely unfounded. According to the original plot, the dwarves' predicament was roughly the same as it was now. After their ponies were stolen by the trolls, the Hobbit and Thorin's two cousins tracked them down. They wanted to rescue their ponies on their own, but were discovered by the trolls. After a brief struggle, the three were defeated, but Thorin and the others arrived shortly after. To be honest, as the dwarven prince and a group of warriors trusted by Thorin, this group of dwarves was quite powerful. In a few moves, they made the trolls scream and suffer injuries all over. But at the critical moment, the trolls used Bilbo as a hostage, threatening to make Thorin and the others surrender, otherwise they would tear the Hobbit apart. As a result, the dwarves actually gave in, threw down their weapons, and allowed themselves to be tied up by the trolls, and that's how things are now. Looking at the dwarves tied to logs and roasting over the fire in the forest ahead, Liang Yue was speechless. He didn't know whether to praise these people for being brave and responsible, or to think they had problems with their brains. According to the original plot, this was the time for the Hobbit to appear. Bilbo Baggins used his verbal skills to delay the trolls. He diverted the trolls' attention by discussing how to make dwarves taste better. When the time officially came for dawn to break, Gandalf finally appeared with a "You shall not pass." He used his staff to smash through the rocks on the east side, and then let the sunlight into the field. Under the sunlight, the trolls turned into stone statues. Gandalf also completed a glorious rescue. However, compared to the original plot, the time when Liang Yue and Gandalf arrived was obviously much earlier. Due to Liang Yue's intervention, it was still at least an hour before the sun rose. The old wizard hadn't reached his time to appear, and without the help of sunlight, Liang Yue wasn't sure whether his holy light spell could effectively kill the trolls. On the other hand, Gandalf himself was just quietly hiding aside, watching, with a hint of anxiety on his old face, but he couldn't provide any effective solutions. "How about I give it a try?" Liang Yue said as he looked at the dwarves who were tied to the bonfire by the trolls, and the Hobbit who was giving his unique insights on the delicacies, and then looked at Gandalf who was still lying in the bushes. There weren't many trolls on the opposite side at this time, only 3 in total. However, each of them was 4 or 5 meters tall, with thick skin and flesh, and a burly figure. Almost no failure. "Okay. Then try. The secret to cooking dwarves is, what is it? Tell us quickly." "The secret is, you have to skin them first." "Get me the skinning knife." "No. You traitor, I won't forget this deck." "Bilbo, you sly fox. I curse you." "Oh no. Not the guys, I think we can discuss it." Amidst the dwarves' bursts of roars and clamor, just as a tall troll was holding a dagger that was enough to be used as a long knife, about to skin one of the dwarves with a red beard, Liang Yue had already climbed up a big tree next to him silently. Looking at the 3 silly white-skinned giants below, this guy didn't hesitate and jumped straight down from the tree in midair. With a flick of his sleeve, 2 sharp standard long swords were immediately held in his palm as the bright red cloak fluttered. The whole person was like a pouncing cheetah. Using the force of the accumulated momentum, he thrust a long sword in his hand. Backhand, with a soft sound, the long blade immediately plunged into the troll's head. Half of the sword body entered, and red and white things gushed out from the gap in the wound. "This guy's head bone is really hard enough." This thought flashed through Liang Yue's mind. But he didn't waste any time. At this time he stomped his feet hard on the shoulders of this troll, who was already weak and about to collapse to the ground, and the whole person jumped up again quickly. The longsword in his hand was like 2 sharp claws. Puchy, taking advantage of the fact that the other party hadn't reacted, the longsword stabbed into the eye socket of another troll next to him with force and accuracy. Immediately afterwards, Liang Yue stomped hard again, and the whole person instantly rose into the air, rushing towards the remaining troll. It was just at this time that after 2 companions were killed in a row, the remaining troll finally reacted. Even if his brain was stupid facing someone's aerial pounce, it subconsciously waved its thick arms, howling, and backing away in horror. However, at this time, Liang Yue suddenly stepped hard in the void in midair, and the original direction of the whole person's soaring suddenly changed, from the original straight pounce to a diagonal shot. With a shua sound, a red shadow flashed, and Liang Yue pounced in front of the troll's chest at an extremely fast speed. Having long been accustomed to this mode of lightning skill change, the double swords in his hand immediately borrowed the force of the flight and fiercely stabbed into the other party's thick neck. Puchy, a large amount of blood spurted out from the troll's neck, and Liang Yue jumped lightly, taking a step ahead. Landing and hiding aside, he waved the double swords in his hand, made a very handsome sword flower, threw the weapons back into the storage space, and then looked at the dwarves in the firelight. Liang Yue's cheetah raid 3 in a row easily solved the 3 trolls in just a few breaths. This record immediately moved the dwarves in front of him, each with a look of surprise and shock, unable to recover for a long time until the old wizard Gandalf walked over from the bushes with his staff, looking leisurely, unhurried, and with a confident look on his face. Chapter 134 Ogre and Chapter X27, S Treasure. So, you really are going to slay a dragon? Mr. Liang Yue? Yes, Prince Thorin. However, besides valuing the honor, my purpose in slaying the dragon is also driven by my interest in the materials on its body. That's naturally not a problem. If you truly succeed in slaying the dragon, its corpse will, of course, be your spoils of war. So, are you willing to join our company and journey to the Lonely Mountain together? Of course. In fact, Gandalf had already invited me before, willing to vouch for me. Moreover, I've already received my reward for joining the team from him in advance. So, you've already received satisfactory compensation from Gandalf. Yes, it's a meditation technique that can be used to enhance mental strength. It should also be helpful for energy absorption, I see. However, Mr. Liang Yue, since you're willing to join our dwarven company, I hope you can sign this contract as well. That way, even though you've already obtained the reward you wanted from Gandalf, you can still receive 1/15 of the treasure in the dwarven city after the mission is accomplished. As he spoke, Thorin solemnly took out a piece of parchment from his chest and spread it out in front of him, covered with densely written clauses. Through the convenience of language mastery, Liang Yue could easily understand the words written on it. This is a contract of trust, Liang Yue. After signing it, you'll gain 14 more trustworthy companions, which can only benefit you. After all, you were originally planning to slay the dragon, weren't you? Gandalf, who was standing nearby, also joined in at this time, and handed a quill to Liang Yue. All right, after all, it's 1/15 of the treasure in the Dwarven Kingdom, and reliable teammates. Who wouldn't want that? Upon seeing this, Liang Yue shrugged his shoulders and naturally wouldn't refuse. After taking the quill, he signed his name on the paper contract with a flourish. After the contract was completed, Liang Yue clearly felt that the gazes of the people around him had become much friendlier. From this, it can be seen that in this world similar to Western society, the role of contracts is still very important. Afterwards, Liang Yue put away the signed contract and placed it in his storage space. If this contract is mine, then what about the ones on Bilbo and the others? Could it be that this is a magical contract? Each time a name is signed, the one on the others will automatically be filled in. In the end, Liang Yue didn't ask the question in his heart, and after he signed the contract, Gandalf and Thorin quickly turned their attention to the 3 troll corpses nearby. I remember that there weren't originally any trolls in this forest. They must have come from the Etenmoors. Even trolls are starting to wander around. It seems that the situation in Middle-earth is deteriorating. That's indeed the case. They haven't left their clan's gathering place for at least an age, starting from after the Dark Lord's reign. Speaking of this, Gandalf's old face was covered with layers of wrinkles, and his eyes began to become solemn. The dwarf Prince Thorin also gradually became serious. I heard that these trolls turn to stone when they encounter sunlight. Right, Liang Yue reminded him from the sight. At this time in his heart, he sighed secretly. It seemed that Gandalf's appearance, although he sent a precious meditation technique to himself, his plan to monopolize the troll treasure trove was probably impossible to realize. Those promised coins, as well as gold and silver ornaments, were naturally not in his eyes, but those 3 weapons forged by the high elves of the First Age? That means there must be their lair nearby. After being reminded by this guy, Thorin and Gandalf almost immediately reacted. Soon, the group embarked on this short treasure hunt. Then, about 5 minutes later, the group found the troll's cave dwelling in a cave near the hill behind. This was an underground pit created by digging. It was dark inside, with almost no light, but this was also very in line with the troll's habits. This cave was not big. The air was filled with a foul smell, and the buzzing of flies resounded throughout the cave. Not willing to stop even at dusk, Liang Yue waved his sleeve at this time, took out a pile of torches from the storage space and distributed them to everyone, and the fire quickly illuminated the inside of the cave. Oh, it stinks here. This is the troll's treasure. Bilbo, be careful not to touch it randomly. Cough cough cough. The smell here is terrible. Even I, a dwarf who hasn't bathed for a whole year, feel a little nauseous. Wow, I feel like I'm going to suffocate him. It turns out there really is treasure here. These gold coins and jewelry are just placed on the ground. It's such a pity. I say anyone can take these things, right? I agree. Nori, what? Get me a shovel. I want to temporarily bury these gold coins. Why bury them? Because we can't take them away for the time being. That's right. We're about to head home. Now is not a good time to take them on the road. Liang Yue didn't care about the dwarves' noise and discussion behind him. Anyway, he didn't care about those gold coins, as well as plates and utensils made of gold at this time. This guy was looking at the end of the cave, searching carefully. A pile of armor and weapons were piled up there in a mess. Thorin and Gandalf didn't decline at this time, and reached out to search inside, and soon each found a weapon. If someone's estimate was correct, that should be Orcrist and Glamdring. Damn, they're really fast. After complaining in his heart, this guy also stepped on the ground around him with his feet at this time, and soon found a dagger buried in the dust. Pulling out the scabbard, Liang Yue narrowed his eyes. Sure enough, it's a good thing. It's light and sharp. The elf's craftsmanship is really a bit heaven-defying. At this time, he didn't use the observation technique to check, but even with the experience of using cold weapons in this period of time, Liang Yue could easily judge that this was a good dagger. Afterwards, after stuffing this elven dagger into Bilbo's arms, who was looking around, he went to Thorin and Gandalf. Although it was not described in the original plot, Liang Yue had already discovered at this time that there were more than just Orcrist and Glamdring in the pile of weapons and armor at the end of the cave. Maybe I can find something better. Chapter 135, Radagast the Grey Wizard. It has to be said that Gandalf and Thorin are indeed worthy of being two high-level indigenous figures in Middle-earth. Their ability to appreciate weapons is undoubtedly unquestionable. One has lived long and seen a lot, and the other's entire clan is based on blacksmithing, forging various weapons and armors. The things that can be selected by these two from a pile of messy objects are definitely the best of them. Liang Yue had actually expected this in his heart, but the fact that the rest were all garbage was something this guy himself didn't expect. Alright, now let us leave this filthy place holding the artifact forged by the elven race. Although Gandalf's evaluation of it was that there was no better weapon to be found, Thorin at this time didn't seem very satisfied. In the heart of this dwarf prince, although it was orcs who killed his father and grandfather, he also harbored resentment towards the elves, who were once allies but later turned a blind eye to the plight of the dwarves and broke their trust. To have himself use the weapons of those elves to kill enemies was, in the eyes of this stubborn dwarf, inherently a humiliating thing. Therefore, although Thorin did not put down the Orcrist sword in his hand under Gandalf's persuasion, he was still very unwilling in his heart. After shouting at the other members of his clan in the cave, he walked out first with a sullen face. Gandalf then came to Bilbo's side, looking at the little hobbit who was now somewhat at a loss, holding the dagger that Liang Yue had just stuffed into his arms. The old wizard showed a kind look. A very good sword, Mr. Baggins, also crafted with high elven craftsmanship, and the size is just right for you, but I can't take it. This is a magic sword, Baggins. Once orcs approach you, it will emit a blue halo as a warning. It's very practical, but I have never touched a sword in my life, let alone used it to deal with enemies. Gandalf, then I hope you never have to use it, but when it does come in handy, please remember that true courage lies not in taking lives, but in sparing them. After saying that, Gandalf left this little hobbit with an unfathomable smile, and then turned and walked towards the cave. Don't listen to that old man's nonsense, Mr. Baggins. Weapons are used to protect yourself and your companions. If danger comes to your door, don't hesitate, pick up the sword and chop them down. Keeping your own life is the most important thing. After saying that, Liang Yue also left him with a meaningful smile, patted him on the shoulder, and then walked towards the entrance of the cave. I heard someone was saying bad things about me. Sir Knight, you must have misheard. Gandalf, something is approaching. Something is approaching quickly. Everyone be careful. Gather together, don't scatter. Just as Liang Yue had just walked out of the cave, several dwarves suddenly faced the woods not far away and issued a warning. For a time, the atmosphere of the entire team immediately became tense. Although someone familiar with the plot knew that those who came this time were not enemies, Liang Yue still pretended to take out his longsword and took the initiative to walk towards the front of the team. Immediately afterwards, a violent shaking occurred in the dense forest covered by layers of branches. Speaking, Gandalf came to this old man who looked a little neurotic, and gave him a big hug. Not caring about the other party's sloppiness, the surrounding dwarves saw this and put down their weapons one after another. "What are you doing here, old friend? I'm looking for you, Gandalf. Things are not good, very bad." "How so?" "Oh, what was I going to say? Give me a minute, let me think about it first." I was just about to say it, the words were right on the tip of my tongue. Afterwards, this old man began an unremarkable amnesia performance, scratching his head and choking his neck, which made Liang Yue feel a little embarrassed. And finally, this brown-robed wizard unexpectedly took out a stick insect from his mouth. "Green wood is sick, Gandalf. Darkness covers the land, all things cease to grow, only bad things grow. The air is filled with stench, and the worst are those webs." "What do you mean?" "It's spiders, Gandalf, very big spiders. They must be descendants of Ungoliant, otherwise I'm not a wizard. I'm tracking their direction. They come from Dol Guldur? But that old castle has long been abandoned." "No, Gandalf, it's not abandoned. The power of darkness is entrenched there, an unprecedented dark power. The shadow of ancient terror looms there." This line is too theatrical. Even if I am in the real world now, I feel that he is performing sitting on a stone on the periphery. Liang Yue was listening to the old man in the crowd telling the story while wiping the double swords in his hand, listening to the brown-robed wizard's stories of taking the world as his responsibility and worrying about all living beings. Liang Yue suddenly felt that his appreciation ability had improved a lot. Then, this guy's ears suddenly moved, and with his keen hearing, he captured a strange sound in the forest. Quietly standing up from the stone, Liang Yue then hid in the dense forest with his sword. After a few breaths, a short wolf howl suddenly sounded in the forest, and then stopped abruptly. Puff whoosh. After 2 sounds of metal friction, Liang Yue returned to the crowd again, dragging a dead warg corpse under his hand. "Warg scouts. The orc army is nearby." Seeing this, Thorin immediately unsheathed the orcrist sword in his hand and said with a solemn expression, "Besides your clansmen, who else have you told about this expedition?" Gandalf's face was unusually ugly at this time, and he questioned Thorin. "No one." "Are you sure?" "I can swear." "What's wrong?" "You are being hunted by orcs." "Then we have to leave here quickly. Things are not good." "Our horses, they ran away." "Oh no, don't worry, I'll lead them away." At this moment of chaos, the gray-robed wizard suddenly stood up, with a look of confidence on his face, and said to everyone, "Those are Gundabad wargs, Radagast. They will catch up with you and tear you apart." Gandalf was not optimistic about his partner's responsibility at this time, so he reminded him from the side, who knew that he would be greeted by the gray-robed wizard's contempt and a faint look of complacency. "These who pull the cart for me are Rosgable rabbits. I want to see if those wargs can catch up with me." If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 136, Wolf Riders. A woo, a woo, a woo. A series of dense wolf howls rang out in the forest, the sound desolate and fierce echoing through the surrounding tall trees. It felt as if the sound would immediately attack from all directions, causing people to unconsciously sink into deep fear. Speaking of which, although the brown-robed wizard Radagast seemed a bit crazy and unreliable before, he now showed the responsibility and courage of one of the 5 great wizards of Middle-earth. Thus, he rode on a wheeled wooden cart, with messy branches and leaves all over his head, pulled by more than a dozen fat rabbits, galloping forward all the way. Before long, he was surrounded by a large group of orc cavalry riding wargs, low roars, tearing sounds, and even the sudden attacks of blades when the riders passed each other, all closely followed behind the brown-robed wizard. However, this sloppy old wizard himself had surprisingly good driving skills. With the rabbits of Rosgable running wildly, he controlled the wooden cart under his feet, maneuvering, speeding, and leaping. Before long, he managed to slip away, successfully shaking off the entanglement of the warg riders, and came to the leading position at the front. Continuing forward, after a while, he disappeared completely into the forest in a puff of smoke. In contrast, Gandalf and the dwarves were now quietly lurking in the grass, holding their breath, occasionally cautiously poking their heads out to investigate. After confirming that the surroundings were temporarily safe, everyone climbed up, looking back at the place where the orc cavalry disappeared with lingering fear. "We can't stay in the forest. This is wolf territory. We need to leave here as soon as possible. Quick! Follow me." Gandalf seemed very decisive at this time, making a decision almost immediately, and then took the lead. leading the dwarves forward. The direction of escape was surprisingly the same direction that the brown-robed wizard had left, and Thorin vaguely felt that something was wrong at this moment, but out of trust in Gandalf, he didn't say much at this time. Immediately directing the others in the team to go first, he himself stayed behind, carrying his sword, to cover the rear. Liang Yue saw all of this. Based on his understanding of the script, he naturally knew that Gandalf now had a purpose, which was to lead this team to the territory of the elves. However, due to the ethnic conflicts between the dwarves and the elves, if he told them in advance, Thorin and the dwarves in the team would definitely not accept Gandalf's suggestion. Even if the old wizard's purpose was to use the knowledge of the Elven King to interpret the riddles on the Dwarf Kingdom map, it wouldn't work either. However, Liang Yue didn't say much about this. He behaved very low-key at this time, running in front of the dwarf team, behind Gandalf, neither rushing forward nor lagging behind. In fact, in his own mind, he also wanted to see what the elven settlement looked like in the scenes of the film and television dramas. That was a very beautiful place, backed by mountains and rivers, with waterfalls falling from high places, and elegant white stone buildings located between the cliffs. It had a bit of the flavor of towering mountains and a secluded paradise, and now that Liang Yue happened to have a camera, he naturally wanted to take a photo there, leave a souvenir, and record a panoramic image of the elven sanctuary if possible. It wouldn't be impossible to play a collaborative shooting game with a group of people. Soon, Gandalf had led the group out of the forest and into an open grassland area. This was a wilderness terrain. The further they went, the road began to become flatter, and people's vision could see a very long distance. The trees were gradually becoming sparse, and a large area of continuous brown shortgrass grew on the ground, with some large stones scattered here and there. According to Liang Yue's own judgment, their team should have reached a plateau area at this time. In the distance, the brown-robed wizard Radagast had already led dozens of orc cavalry away for at least a few kilometers, and was gradually opening up a safe distance. Gandalf led the others to hide behind a large rock at this time, glanced at his old friend who had run far away, then quickly turned his head and guided the dwarves behind him to run forward. Hurry. This way. My friend can't help us lure away the orc army for too long. Then, the old wizard strode forward with his two long legs, leading the way nimbly. Liang Yue still followed unhurriedly, and behind him was a group of dwarves who were already panting a bit to woo. Just then, another wolf howl suddenly came from another direction. They were not on the orc cavalry that had been chasing the brown-robed wizard before. It seemed that this should be another team. Moreover, this newly emerging orc cavalry was not far from Liang Yue and the others. Wolves, as creatures, generally have a very keen sense of smell in order to hunt better. Therefore, the moment the other party appeared, Gandalf noticed the bad situation, so he immediately led the dwarves to hide behind a rock, then lowered his body and continued to move forward along the undulating hillside. Gandalf, where are you taking us? Thorin keenly noticed something unusual at this time, looking at a certain position in front, squinting his eyes and asking the old wizard. Gandalf just glanced at the other party at this time, and then silently continued to hurry on. Seeing this, everyone drew out their weapons and prepared to meet the enemy, but Gandalf on the side seemed to have found a way out, and continued to shout to the dwarves, this way, run quickly. Hearing this, everyone also subconsciously continued to follow the figure of the old wizard. Liang Yue at this time had also quietly retreated to the end of the team, carrying two swords in his hands, ready to fight at any time. Only a moment later, they were surrounded by dozens of warg riders next to a large rock. The orcs made excited howls, urging their mounts to slowly approach, prepared to fight. Thorin drew out a orcrist, gradually lowered his body, and entered a combat state. The surrounding dwarves also gathered back to back, staring closely at the enemies not far away. In contrast, Gandalf had magically disappeared at this time, but Liang Yue knew that the other party should have found the secret passage to the elven territory. Just then, a warg couldn't hold back its temper, roared, and then pounced fiercely towards everyone. Seeing this, Liang Yue rushed forward without hesitation. Facing the warg's pounce, he jumped to the side, and with a swing of his sword, the sharp longsword directly cut off half of the wolf's head. At the same time, another orc rider who caught up was shot down by Thorin's handsome dwarf cousin, Keely. Liang Yue continued to rush forward at this time. Facing the orcs who had begun to launch a general attack, he slammed his feet on the ground, a sudden advance, and plunged into the wolf pile. After dodging a sword from an orc rider, the whole person soared into the air. Leaping quickly into the air, his two swords turned into two crescents, slashing continuously, and three orcs were directly beheaded by him. Then, taking advantage of the wide wolf back under him, he stomped down fiercely. Crack! A crisp sound. The spine of a warg immediately bent and deformed, and Liang Yue took advantage of the rebounding force to pounce on several other riders, while the internal force in his danshin quickly surged into the meridians of his legs when approaching the target. His feet suddenly stopped fiercely in the air, and the whole person instantly turned into a gray shadow. Swish! The two swords pierced through the air, directly cutting the four orc riders running side by side into two pieces. Chapter 137 Elf Kingdom. After landing, Liang Yue didn't linger in place for even a moment, twisting, spinning, and spreading his arms. His entire being instantly transformed into a spinning top. The twin swords in his hands were like death-bringing wings, flashing with silver light. The air itself cleaved apart with ear-piercing shrieks. Puff 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 sizzle wherever the sword light reached. Severed limbs flew, and broken arms and blood splattered everywhere. In the blink of an eye, the ward mounts surrounding Liang Yue were all noticeably shorter, and the orc riders on their backs were even more tragically dismembered on the spot in just 2 breaths. More than a dozen warg riders and their mounts were cut down by Liang Yue. This battle record not only caused the surrounding orcs' morale to plummet, unconsciously halting their advance, but also caused them to avoid the area where he was active. Even the dwarves in the rear were dumbfounded, deeply moved, and remained somewhat dazed for a long while. Everyone, come this way. Fools! Hurry! Just then, Gandalf reappeared behind them, right below the large rock where they were surrounded by orcs, shouting loudly. Thorin, the dwarf prince, heard this and immediately looked back, a hint of hesitation flashing in his eyes, but he still immediately directed the others to retreat towards Gandalf's direction. Liang Yue didn't become greedy for merit and advance rashly at this time, because he knew that now was not the time for him to display his killing prowess, and besides, he could already hear the sound of horses' hooves coming from behind the hill not far away. If he guessed correctly, the newcomers should be the elven cavalry. Woo! Sure enough. Just as Liang Yue was covering Thorin and was the last one to jump into the passage below the rock, a long horn suddenly sounded on the grassland. Immediately afterward, the sound of horses' hooves, the sound of hacking and killing, and the whistling sound of arrows piercing through the air all rang out. Just then, an orc corpse suddenly rolled down from above the passage, with a delicate arrow feather stuck in its temple. If Liang Yue wasn't mistaken, this kind of arrow should be exactly the same as the arrows he had bought from the black market in the town before, all made by the elves. However, Thorin was obviously more aware of the origin of this kind of thing than he was, so, almost as soon as he saw the appearance of this arrow, he looked at Gandalf to the side, with a hint of displeasure in his expression. There's a passage here, it's not clear where it leads, should we go through? Just then, a dwarf warrior beside him discovered a path in the depths of the passage, so he shouted to the others. In the end, after a silent dispute and mental struggle, Thorin still chose to compromise, wearing a sullen face, and led the team into the passage. After passing through a rugged crevice, in about a quarter of an hour, the front of the passage suddenly became open and bright. Immediately afterward, everyone reached the end of the passage. A steep stone cliff appeared before them, and at the other end of the line of sight, a fairyland-like building was located on the opposite side of the canyon. Just as Liang Yue had thought before, the building complex was built against the cliff face, waterfalls cascading down from the top of the mountain, dividing into several clear streams, flowing through the building, and finally merging into the river valley below the stone cliff. The setting sun in the sky was shining obliquely from afar, casting a layer of orange afterglow. Here everything seemed like a dream, so beautiful that it felt somewhat unreal. Thorin slammed his weapon heavily on the ground at this time, the look in his eyes towards the building carrying a bit of resentment, and the dwarves behind him were the same. Only the hobbit Bilbo Baggins, because he saw the appearance of the elven kingdom for the first time, was immediately shocked and yearned for beautiful things. Of course, Liang Yue on the side was not much better off. When he came back to his senses a little, he immediately took out a fully automatic camera from the storage space, held it in his hand, and took a burst of frantic shots of the distant building complex. Later on, this guy even began to directly command the spherical camera to fly into the sky. Overhead shots, side shots, upward views, etc., recording the scenes of the Elven Kingdom from various angles. Imladris Valley, that is, what ordinary people call the Elven Kingdom, Rivendell. This is the last refuge of the Eastern Great Sea. Gandalf slowly appeared behind everyone at this time, introducing them in a cadence. You've been planning all along to lead us here. Do you want us dwarves to seek refuge from our enemies? Gandalf. Thorin turned around at this time, his eyes staring at the old wizard as he questioned him. Thorin's originally tough face suddenly turned into helplessness upon hearing this. Seeing this, the old wizard immediately continued to persuade him to succeed in this matter. We need to use some tactics, such as politeness, and the courage to put down grudges, Thorin, so let me handle this matter for now. After the two reached an agreement, They led everyone along the path on the hillside on one side of the valley, towards the Elven Kingdom. They were not in a hurry along the way, and it was not until sunset that they finally crossed a narrow stone bridge and arrived at the main entrance of the Elven Kingdom as the race with the most prideful nature in Middle-earth, claiming to be the epitome of elegance and nobility. Liang Yue and others naturally could not rashly break into other people's territory at this time, so Gandalf led everyone to wait at the foot of the stone steps at the foot of the mountain. After a moment, an elf who was obviously in charge came out unhurriedly, and then affectionately called Gandalf Mithrandir. Based on his understanding of the plot, Liang Yue naturally knew that Mithrandir was the old wizard's other name, and that the elf was the steward of the Elven Kingdom's King Elrond. However, this guy wasn't very interested in these things. While Gandalf stepped forward to exchange greetings and negotiate with him, he himself was still holding the spherical camera, taking pictures of the surrounding scenery with great interest. The hobbit Bilbo was also beside him at this time, looking at the images on the display screen with curiosity and amazement on his face, occasionally gesturing with his fingers and asking Liang Yue questions. Woo! In just a moment, a melodious horn suddenly sounded from the opposite side of the stone bridge, followed by the rumbling sound of horses' hooves. Everyone turned their heads to look, only to see a team of elven knights rushing towards this side in a mighty manner. Chapter 138 Elven Vegetable Salad Banquet. Facing the returning elven knights, the dwarves appeared very cautious, each gripping their weapons and subconsciously huddling back to back, wary of a possible sudden attack. However, the elves clearly didn't take them seriously. Elrond, leading the group, simply circled the dwarves in their defensive stance before dismounting and exchanging greetings with Gandalf. In fact, according to the storyline of this hobbit world, not all elves harbored animosity towards dwarves. However, as the delivery date approached, the dwarves unexpectedly went back on their word and raised the price. Thranduil considered this a breach of the trade agreement between them, and angrily stormed off. The discord between the two sides was thus sown until the dragon Smaug attacked the dwarven kingdom of Erebor. The dwarven kingdom sent a request for help to the elves. As a result, Thranduil led the army of woodland elves to the scene, but out of resentment towards the dwarves, he ultimately did not offer assistance, and just watched as the dwarves fled in defeat. Thus, the feud between the two sides was established. King Thranduil of the woodland elves believed that the dwarves had broken the contract first, so his side wasn't obliged to sacrifice the lives of many elven warriors for them. The dwarves, on the other hand, believed that business was business, but when their race was invaded by external forces, the elves didn't come to their rescue, and watched their kingdom collapse and suffer heavy losses. This violated the principle of racial alliance and defense, and was a true display of a loss of racial integrity. Therefore, both sides believed that the other had violated the contract, and thus harbored deep hatred. The longer the time dragged on, the more they disliked each other's races, and eventually they became estranged. Liang Yue, as an outsider and a bystander, had naturally understood all of this, but if you were to explicitly state which side was at fault, this guy really couldn't make up his mind. Firstly, the greed of the dwarven kingdom planted the seeds of resentment between the two races. The dwarves were at fault first, that much was certain, but later, during the invasion of the dragon Smaug, and the orc raid on the dwarven race, Thranduil didn't send troops to rescue his allies because of his personal grievances, and watched the situation worsen. This was a bit much for a king. It indicated that the king of the woodland elves was somewhat petty in character, giving people a feeling that his virtue didn't match his position. Of course, Liang Yue, as an intruder from another world, would definitely not intervene in the conflict between these races, occasionally eating melons, tempering himself, and brushing up on orcs when he had nothing to do. These were the things Liang Yue should really be doing, although it wouldn't be too difficult to resolve the conflict between the two races, as long as he could get the white gem from the treasure vault of the dwarven kingdom at the right time, and return it to Thranduil. The conflict could be alleviated immediately, but this kind of thing should be left to Bilbo Baggins, the little hobbit. Anyway, this plot belonged to him in the original story. After a brief meeting and conversation, King Elrond invited the dwarves to be guests in the Elven Kingdom, and offered to host a banquet for them. The dwarves, who had been running wildly for most of the day and were quite exhausted, naturally wouldn't refuse at this time. Liang Yue, on the other hand, was lurking in the middle of his companions, continuing to walk along the road, taking pictures and videos with a spherical camera in his hand, recording all the surrounding scenery. The location of the banquet was an elegant open-air stone platform, surrounded by several elves skilled in musical instruments, playing unknown songs in the afterglow of the setting sun. Gazing at the beautiful scenery not far away, with a gentle breeze blowing from the valley from time to time, everything seemed so beautiful. Unfortunately, the dwarves, who were short in stature and had a rough personality, did it seem to appreciate the aesthetics of the elven race. Liang Yu's teammates had all their attention on the dishes on the table, while still complaining incessantly. Unlike the dwarves, who were used to eating large pieces of meat and drinking large bowls of wine, the elves were basically vegetarians. Therefore, most of the meals in front of them were just washed cabbage leaves, onions, carrots, potatoes, etc., not even cooked, just placed on the plate and eaten raw. Therefore, the dwarves at the table, except for the wine, which they found palatable, could hardly swallow anything else. In a bad mood, even the music in their ears was regarded as noise by the dwarves. Liang Yue watched the excitement from the side, but he didn't say much. Instead, he casually sipped the elven race's wine and occasionally ate a few bites of vegetables. Although this guy's storage space also contained a lot of meat pies, wine, milk, and even various finished dishes prepared in advance by Kimuro Saya and Takagi Yuriko. But now was obviously not a good time to take them out and enjoy them. After all, this was a banquet specially prepared by the elven race to entertain them. Even Gandalf, King Elrond, and the dwarven Prince Thorn on the other table were eating these things. If Liang Yue took out his own food to eat at this time, the dwarves at the table would definitely be happy, but his actions would undoubtedly be slapping the elven race in the face. After the banquet ended, night slowly fell, and candles were lit in the elven kingdom, but the moon in the sky was what really provided illumination. Liang Yue didn't know if it was just his own illusion, but he felt that the moonlight seemed particularly bright in the place where the elves lived at this time. Although it couldn't compare to the sun during the day, it was enough to illuminate everything around. Gandalf, King Elrond, Thorin, the little hobbit Bilbo, and an old dwarf with a white beard had separated from the others and entered a room alone for conversation. If Liang Yue remembered correctly, they should be deciphering a riddle on a map of the dwarven city at this time. During the process, they seemed to need the help of moonlight at a specific moment. Then the final answer they got was stand by the grey stone when the thrush knocks, and the setting sun with the last light of Durin's day will shine up on the keyhole. To be honest, Liang Yue didn't care about the answer to this riddle at all, because as far as this guy was concerned, as long as he could get to the foot of Erebor smoothly, not to mention the stone walls of the dwarven city that had already been sealed, even if the walls were made of pure metal, he could successfully dig a passage for you. The so-called secret key and the gate hidden in the stone were just tricks to deceive people. Chapter 139 Elf Princess? Under the moonlight, the dwarves were now lighting campfires, preparing a midnight snack for themselves with some of the vegetables left over from the previous banquet. Along with the sausages and flatbreads they carried, the firewood they used was even directly dismantled from the furniture of the elves. Liang Yue, standing nearby, couldn't bear to watch, so he took out a pile of meat pies and milk to add to their meal, earning unanimous praise from the dwarves. Meanwhile, he continued to enthusiastically conduct aerial photography of the elven kingdom. Rivendell under the moonlight lacked the brilliance of daylight, instead possessing a touch of sanctity and gentleness. After nightfall, most of the elves had gone to sleep, with only the guards patrolling the area above the distant river valley, where a sizable settlement was being built. The source of the river valley's waterfall merged with a forest, with tall stone halls and towers emerging from the cover of trees, appearing particularly mysterious and serene under the moonlight, unconsciously making people want to explore its depths. However, just as Liang Yue was manipulating the spherical camera to slowly fly towards that area, before it even entered the forest, a gray shadow suddenly flashed and disappeared, shooting from the tall trees. Liang Yue was somewhat unable to react in time, or rather, he was now wholeheartedly focused on exploring this elven kingdom and hadn't expected to be attacked, and so a crisp crack sound was heard. The gray shadow instantly pierced through his sphere, and this expensive, fully automatic camera immediately lost power, falling straight down towards the river valley cliff below. Upon seeing this, Liang Yue immediately let out a miserable cry, then began to run with large strides. He leaped across the various buildings of Rivendell like a flying frog. In just a few breaths, he had leaped over 100 meters. Arriving at the edge of a cliff facing the spherical camera about to fall from sight into the river valley, he hesitated almost not at all. He stomped his foot hard, and cracks immediately appeared on the hard white stone roof. Liang Yue himself, however, instantly leaped dozens of meters, soaring into the air above the river valley, steadily catching the falling sphere in his arms. Careful. At this moment, the dwarves in the distance finally reacted, but they were now too far away from Liang Yue to provide any assistance, and could only stand on a stone platform and shout from afar. On the other side of the river valley's architectural complex, Gandalf, Thorin, and the others also turned their gazes over at this time. However, what happened next shocked all the onlookers. After catching the camera, Liang Yue, who was originally in mid air with a raging river 100 meters below and no place to gain leverage, suddenly performed a mid-air step. An invisible wall of air was created out of thin air, and with his fierce kick, the air wall transformed into invisible ripples of energy that spread outwards. Looking at Liang Yue himself, he used the force of this step to fly back towards the building he had come from at an extremely fast speed. In the blink of an eye, he had landed firmly on the roof. AWW roar. Upon seeing this, the dwarves in the distance immediately burst into cheers, breaking the originally quiet night. Liang Yue, with a look of distress, hugged his spherical camera, and while walking back, pulled out the arrow that was stuck in the middle. Looking at the precision instruments inside the camera that had been damaged by the penetration, he felt a bit of luck in his heart and immediately asked the system, "It really can? Repair it immediately." As Liang Yue's voice fell, the sphere held in his hands was immediately enveloped by a layer of faint light, and within that halo, a series of faint crackling sounds quickly rang out. Almost in the blink of an eye, the hole pierced by the arrow in the middle of the camera was repaired as good as new. However, before Liang Yue could rejoice and check whether the previously recorded video data had been saved, there was suddenly another person in front of him. Looking up, appearing in his line of sight was an elven woman. She was tall, with fair skin, wearing a black half-skirt, brown and knee-high leather boots, a quiver on her back, and a standard elven bow in her hand. This elven woman was extremely beautiful, with a breathtaking face beneath her dark brown hair. However, Liang Yue vaguely felt a sense of familiarity from this girl's appearance, and it was the kind that grew more familiar the more he looked at her. Tiffany Taylor. It can't be that coincidental, right? Looking at this elven woman who was gradually walking towards him, Liang Yue tilted his head, and the certainty of his guess grew stronger. Human, I sensed a feeling of being monitored from the object in your arms earlier. While speaking, the woman had once again knocked an arrow on her bowstring, pointing it diagonally at the ground, stopping 10 meters away from him. I think you must be mistaken, madam. I was just using it to record the scenery of the Elven Kingdom, Liang Yue said, shrugging his shoulders at her. But upon closer thought, what she said didn't seem wrong. To some extent, his so-called recording of the scenery of this architectural complex seemed to include the image capture of the people inside the scene. Recording the scenery of the Elven Kingdom, yes, it's roughly like painting, a way to capture and remember beautiful scenes. I think I'll probably only have this one chance in my life to come to Rivendell, so I want to record everything here as a beautiful memory in my life. If there was anything offensive just now, then I'm very sorry. You mean to say that the sphere is a magical alchemical item that can paint on its own, drawing everything it sees? Although not entirely accurate, the meaning is about the same. As he spoke, Liang Yue reached out and pressed the screen of the camera a couple of times, then turned and faced the screen towards the elven woman, showing her his previous work. That's Rivendell in the daytime. That's right, but why is the picture moving? Unconsciously, the woman put the arrow back into the quiver, slowly came behind Liang Yue, and then looked at the screen with a curious face. You can understand it as it draws many pictures. Every second of image here is composed of dozens of paintings. In the process of quickly switching the pictures, it can record all the scenery trajectories in detail. While speaking, a faint fragrance was emanating from the woman's body, and Liang Yue subconsciously twitched his nose, vaguely able to distinguish a scent of orchid. I don't quite understand, but it's very novel. Can you give it to me? No, I can trade you for other things. Any jewelry will do. I only have this one for now, so I'm sorry. Alright, that's a pity. As she spoke, the elven woman suddenly also twitched her nose, sniffing Liang Yue's body, and then frowned. I've been traveling all day today and haven't taken a bath. That's not it. Are you carrying any items from our elven race? Does this count? Upon hearing this, Liang Yue looked at the woman's face, which was beginning to look a little unkind, thought for a moment, then flipped his sleeve and took out the 3 elven longbows he had bought from the black market, as well as the pile of second-hand arrows. Chapter 140 Dragon Slayer Weapon. Are you talking about these? Liang Yue said, pointing to a pile of so-called elven items on the ground. The bows and arrows of the elven soldiers. Where did you get them? Looking at the things on the ground, the beautiful elf's face looked a little ugly, and she continued to ask. Bought from the black market. Which black market? Gandalf. What's the name of that town? It's the town where we first met. Facing the other party's questioning, Liang Yue immediately tilted his head and looked at the few people who were slowly walking from not far away. Liang Yue looked at the elf woman in front of him and spread his hands in reply. Please allow us to retrieve these relics of our dead clansmen, Sir Knight. According to the customs of our elves, these relics will be buried with their owners as compensation. We will take out twice as many brand new bows and arrows to exchange with you. Speaking was Elrond, the Elven King, who was walking with Gandalf, Thorin, And others of course, no problem, since this is your custom. Are there any other elven items in that black market? The beautiful elf next to him continued to ask him. I don't know if elven jewelry counts. It is said that it was traded from your clan by a certain caravan. When I bought these bows and arrows, there seemed to be a few sets of armor. Judging from the style, it should also be from your elves, but those armors were a bit badly damaged, as if they were smashed by weapons like wolf-tooth clubs, so I didn't buy them. It seems that we should send an army to take a trip. Elrond then reached out and took an arrow from the ground, smelled the solidified black blood on the arrowhead, and frowned. What are you buying these bows and arrows for? The elf woman didn't seem to want to give up questioning Liang Yue at this time, and stood aside and continued to ask. To practice archery. Can you use a bow and arrow too? Not very good. That's why I need to practice then, before buying these elven longbows. What bow and arrow did you use for practice? I used this. As he said that, Liang Yue flipped his sleeves, and took out a lump of dark machinery from his storage space, with various gears and ropes gathered together. With a hard shake, the machinery was immediately unfolded, turning into a somewhat ferocious modern mechanical bow. The black bow body looked very complicated and cold. It was not a delicate creation with beautiful curves like the elven longbow. Its delicacy seemed to have embarked on another evil path. The infrared sight on the bow was even more like a scarlet eye, adding a bit of evil charm to this mechanical bow. This was exactly the only bow and arrow weapon that Liang Yue had obtained from Sayatakaji's cabinet together with Hirano Toda and Kimuro Takashi when he was still in the Apocalypse world. The reason why he brought it with him was because Liang Yue himself was very optimistic about this bow, and had always wanted to find an opportunity to take it out and practice it well, but unfortunately there had never been a chance. Your bow seems a bit special. Looking at the thing in Liang Yue's hand, the beautiful elf was not polite to him, and directly took it over. Then fiddled with it with a curious look on her face. This bow is a bit heavy. The force required to draw the bowstring is unexpectedly small, which should be the effect of those pulleys. The accuracy is also good. These screws seem to be able to make some adjustments to the shooting accuracy. Your bow looks a bit like the craftsmanship of the goblins recorded in the books, but it's a bit different. What is this for? It looks like an eye. That's an infrared sight. After opening it, it can emit a red line, which is used for auxiliary aiming. Look like this. This is very convenient, but for an excellent archer, it is redundant and may hinder your growth. I naturally know this. Its role is only to assist me in the initial stage, and it will be removed later. This bow is somewhat strange in its overall style, but it seems to be quite powerful. This thing is said to be able to shoot an elephant to death with one arrow. Of course I haven't killed an elephant. Several elven guards then walked over and moved away the elven longbows and second-hand arrows. Compared to the beautiful elf next to him showing interest in this modern mechanical bow, Elrond and Gandalf and others only glanced at it a few times before turning their attention to other places. Thorin, Bilbo, and the white-bearded dwarf were leaving here with heavy hearts. Looking at the direction they were going, they should be going to meet with the dwarves as a human knight. How did you get together with that group of dwarves? After returning the mechanical bow in his hand to Liang Yue, the beautiful elf did not leave, but looked at him with a pair of sky-blue eyes and asked, I'm going to slay the dragon, and it just so happens that my goal is the same as Thorin's. Liang Yue replied without any concealment, and according to his estimation, Elrond next to him should have guessed this point long ago. For this reason, another wizard of Middle-earth, the White Wizard Saruman, and the Elven Queen Galadriel, were probably already in Rivendell at this time. Slay the dragon. Erebor, the Dwarven King's city of Durin? They really haven't given up. The elf woman's eyes lit up when she heard this, and then she subconsciously turned her head and glanced at Thorin and others who were about to disappear into the night. Thoughtfully, this is normal. As long as there is a race with a sense of honor, they will want to wash away their past shame. Wanting to slay the dragon, just relying on this bow is not enough. Have you prepared a sharp enough weapon? How about a sword of this craft? Liang Yue's mouth curved up when he heard this, and then he flipped his sleeves again and took out his two standard white-board longswords. This kind of sword, the forging process is good enough to be comparable to our elven skills, but it still cannot break Smaug's dragon skin defense. The woman then gently stroked the sword with her palm, feeling the almost equal diamond-shaped forging surface. A few surprises flashed across her beautiful face, but then she gave a negative answer. Then what about this? A longsword with sharpness and sweeping magic attached, Liang Yue said, and once again took out a sword from the storage space. The style of this sword was no different from the previous standard longsword, but it was surrounded by a faint halo yellow and blue. Under the cover of the night and moonlight, it appeared exceptionally luxurious. Chapter 141 Mountain Giant. The next day, at dawn, As the sun slowly rose from the end of the Imladris Valley, the dwarves packed their gear and hastily set out again. Liang Yue, of course, was among them, for the company burdened with the quest. The Elven Kingdom, as good as it was, wasn't a place to linger. Gandalf was temporarily missing, but according to Liang Yue's knowledge of the plot, Saruman the White, and the Elven Queen Galadriel, should have already arrived in this valley last night as the top powers in Middle-earth, and constantly considering themselves guardians. These few would naturally have a reasonable discussion about the dwarves' expedition as the leader of the wizarding powers. Saruman the White did not agree to let the dwarves provoke the dragon Smog, while Gandalf was clearly on the dwarves' side. Although the Elven Queen Galadriel did not express her position, she secretly supported Gandalf's actions after losing their horses. The dwarves' expedition speed was naturally affected, and they could only travel on foot. Around noon, they finally returned to the highlands outside the Elven Kingdom. However, after being swept by the Elven cavalry yesterday, the road was very peaceful, and the orc forces had temporarily retreated from the surrounding area. Of course, this was only temporary. The orcs had now detected Thorn and the others' trail. The leader of this race, Azog, had his left hand chopped off in a duel with Thorin, so he had always held a grudge against him. He vowed to treat him like the former dwarven king Thror, tear him to pieces, and feed him to the crows, so the orc army would definitely attack again. What do you want to do, Arwen? In the Elven Kingdom of Rivendell, after sending away Saruman the White, Gandalf the Grey, and arranging temporary lodgings for the Elven Queen Galadriel, Elrond returned to his stone hall in the forest unexpectedly. As soon as he entered the house, he saw his daughter had already changed into simple leather armor, carrying a bow and arrows, full of vigor, looking like she was about to go on a long trip. I want to go back, father, but you've only been in Rivendell for less than half a month, and now you want to go back to Lothlorien? Yes, father, I find it a bit boring to stay here with you. Before, weren't you having a good time with Aragorn? I never knew what was so good about that kid who always looked so bitter, even if he is the son of the human emperor, the legitimate heir to Gondor. So, you think you've found someone better? That mysterious knight from last night? Simply comparing these two people, that knight is indeed a little better, but what I'm more interested in is the dragon slaying than you. Now you're not going back to Lothlorien. Of course I'm going back, that's my home, but the process of going home may become a little tortuous. Okay, Ahi. Since you've decided, then go, eh? You agreed? Yes, my beautiful daughter, although I am your father, I cannot always confine you to my side. Thank you. I love you, father. Before you leave, go and greet your grandmother. I've already greeted her. Goodbye, father. Watching his daughter, who was full of joy, disappear before his eyes, Elrond's smile gradually disappeared. At this time, standing at the entrance of the stone hall for a long time, he turned around and climbed to the top floor of the attic. Sure enough, the Elven Queen Galadriel, who had just been arranged for accommodation by him, was already standing quietly on the roof. At this time, I still don't quite understand why you would let me agree to Arwen's request. Fledglings always have to leave the nest. That's how they grow up quickly, but now it's really dangerous outside the Elven Kingdom. The orcs have already come to the periphery of our territory to probe. Arwen will be fine. I will pay attention to her at all times. That mysterious human knight, is he really more important than the son of the human emperor? His arrival has made everything in this world begin to become blurred. All prophecies have begun to move towards chaos, and even the gods cannot know his origin. Is this change developing in a good direction? Yes, I can't be sure about the changes he will bring, but fortunately he has no hostility towards us. What if Arwen is a good thing, better than her original fate, and it's her own choice? Alice. A day passed quickly as the sun slowly set. The dwarves had crossed a continuous snow mountain and arrived at a rocky hillside that looked very abnormal. At first glance, Thorn felt that it was still early, and their team could completely cross this rocky section of less than 1,000 meters, and then find a cave to rest on the spot. So he led the crowd and continued to advance towards the rugged rocky hills. Liang Yue was standing behind the crowd at this time, looking at the three rocky mountains above his head that were showing health bars, hesitated for a while, and finally did not stop them, but followed the dwarves and continued on the road. Speaking of which, this Middle-earth world really has all kinds of strange things. Clearly just a low magic level plane, but it can breed all kinds of mysterious species. Knowing the plot of this world, he naturally knew that these rocky hills that were lying in front of him and were now being stepped on by them were not ordinary mountains but a mysterious giant creature called a stone giant. According to the development of the plot, after nightfall, accompanied by a sudden rainstorm, 3 stone giants would suddenly rise up and fight each other, causing landslides and ground fissures, and the dwarves on one of the stone giants would naturally suffer some hardships as a result. The reason why Liang Yue didn't stop Thorn and the others from taking the risk of climbing at this time, and he honestly followed behind, the reason is that after passing through this crisis plot of the stone giants, the dwarves would then be captured by the goblins who lived in the underground, and in the underground, which was even darker than the goblins' habitat, a magical species named Golem was living there. Rumble. Almost without warning, a rumbling thunder suddenly sounded in the sky, and large swaths of dark rain clouds surged from all directions. In just a moment, the entire sky was shrouded. Crack! A lightning bolt flashed across the sky, followed by a torrential rain that slammed down on the faces of Thorn and the dwarves. Liang Yue was now sticking close to the cliff behind him, following behind the little hobbit Bilbo Baggins. His eyes fixed on a mountain opposite the rain curtain. His eyes were wary and faintly curious. Chapter 142 Battle of Giants. Slow down. Watch your step. On the narrow cliff path, Thorn was at the very front, rain constantly battering his face, stinging his cheeks, blurring his vision. The others followed closely behind him, clutching at each other's clothes, preventing anyone from losing their footing, and ensuring that they could help each other at any moment. Kaboom! A huge bolt of lightning flashed across the sky, the brief burst of energy making the pitch-black rainy night instantly bright. Just then, a huge figure suddenly appeared in front of them. Its shape seemed to blot out the entire sky, and as the lightning flashed, a shadow fell upon the dwarves. The figure swayed like a pendulum, slowly and powerfully, and with a single flick, a huge rock, large enough to be a small mountain, was hurled towards them. Seeing this, the dwarves were filled with dread, because the boulder was flying directly towards their position. Boom! With a deafening roar, the boulder exploded against the cliff face above the group. The narrow path underfoot instantly shook violently, as if struck by a magnitude 10 earthquake, and large chunks of rock tumbled down the cliff face like a waterfall. Fortunately, a small, sloping overhang above them shielded them from most of the falling rocks, but some smaller, scattered stones still pelted them like hail. Liang Yue, holding the hobbit Bilbo by the scruff of his neck with one hand, used the large sword given to him by the system with the other, swatting away the incoming rocks as if they were flies. After a few moments, the crisis temporarily passed. Liang Yue, wearing his full set of standard armor, was naturally unharmed, and the dwarves in the group were all thick-skinned, so a few small stones couldn't hurt them. But this absurd, disaster-level assault was truly terrifying, almost impossible to face. When Liang Yue was sitting in front of the screen with a soda in hand, watching this scene, he didn't think much of it, assuming it was just a slightly larger rock. But now, as he actually found himself in this situation, facing the ordeal of giant rocks falling on his head, the feeling of shock was simply too exciting. This isn't just a storm. It's a thunderstorm. Look over there. Taking advantage of a flash of lightning, the white-bearded dwarf pointed to the huge figure that had reappeared across the rain, and shouted in terror, "Good heavens! The legends are true, it's a giant. A stone giant, everyone be careful. It's throwing a mountain." Boom! The boulder crashed down, and the rock, comparable to a small mountain, instantly shattered into countless pieces. Fortunately, this time the stone giant's target was not them, but another stone giant hiding nearby. Faced with enemies of this magnitude, all their martial prowess, courage, faith, armor, and even magic were useless now. The dwarves could only pray to their ancestors, hoping that the stones flying through the air would not happen to fall on them. The earth trembled, the sky roared, crack, 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 accompanied by a huge cracking sound. Something even more terrifying happened. The once solid ground suddenly split in two, and the dwarves who had been standing on the edge of the cliff were forcibly separated by the splitting cliff face. In an instant, they were separated by nearly 100 meters. It turned out that the stone mountain under Liang Yue and the others was also a stone giant, and the cliff where they were standing was right on its calves. Now that the battle between the giants had begun, it awakened the creature that had been sleeping beneath them, and it split its legs apart, and its huge body sat up from its reclining position before it could even stand up. It was immediately struck on the head by a fierce headbutt from the stone giant hiding behind it. Boom! The sound of the huge rock exploding merged with the thunder in the sky, perfectly blending into the stormy night. If Liang Yue and the others were not on the middle of it, personally experiencing the thrill of the heavens splitting and the earth shaking, they probably would never have believed in the existence of stone giants after being suddenly attacked. The giant under them was naturally unwilling to be humiliated, and immediately retaliated with a haymaker. Who knew that the stone giant on the side even knew some fighting skills, and ducked down to avoid it. while simultaneously delivering an uppercut that landed directly on the chin of the stone giant under Liang Yue and the others at the same time. The stone giant, who had been throwing boulders from a distance, also launched an attack, another fierce throw of a mountain head, directly hitting the back of the head of the stone giant with good fighting skills. With a loud boom, the giant's head burst open, and its legs went soft, and it fell directly into the deep abyss. Then, the giant who threw the boulder began to stride over. And while the stone giant under Liang Yue and the others was still dazed, it delivered a fierce knee strike to its stomach. Boom! At that moment, the heavens and earth collapsed, and the earth shook. The roar produced by the impact alone made everyone see stars and almost burst their eardrums. The harsh environment made it impossible for people to control themselves, and they could only instinctively grab onto others around them. Only, as time slowly passed, and the crowd gradually recovered from the dizziness and blurred vision, and the buzzing in their ears slowly stopped, they were surprised to find that a battle between the stone giants seemed to be over. All the abnormal phenomena around them, the earth shaking, the mountain splitting, and the collapse of earth and rocks, had now returned to calm. Even the fierce storm, lightning, and thunder in the sky had begun to subside and slowly come to an end. Phew! Liang Yue finally breathed a sigh of relief and patted his stiff face. Although he didn't have a mirror and couldn't see his appearance, he knew that his face must be pale and bloodless. Turning his head, he saw that the little hobbit in his hand was still being held tightly, completely unharmed. Only his chest was rising and falling, like a frightened chick, his face full of fear that could not be dispelled for a long time. What the heck? That was too exciting, he cursed inwardly, and then looked around to check on the safety of his teammates. And after a tense confirmation, Liang Yue was shocked to find in that turbulent, cataclysmic scene, the dwarves were all unharmed, one by one. Apart from being a little frightened and appearing somewhat shaken, the others felt almost no discomfort on their bodies. It was simply a miracle. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 143, Goblin Lair. Is this really a miracle? Having safely arrived in a cavern, the wind and rain outside had gradually subsided while everyone else collapsed to the ground, rejoicing in their successful escape from the previous crisis. Liang Yue felt a sense of doubt in his heart. The more he thought about it, the more he felt something was amiss. However, he quickly dismissed the thought from his mind. Never mind that. Now is not the time to think about these things. In any case, the mountain giant plot is finally over, and what comes next is the main event. Everyone be careful. This cave looks like it's often inhabited. Search around. There's no one in the cave. Then let's make a fire and have a good roast. Don't make a fire here. I feel like something's not right. Let's just rest for tonight. After Thorin himself had patrolled the area around the cave for a week, he still felt uneasy, so he interrupted the actions of the dwarves beside him. Although others inevitably grumbled inwardly at his words, they had no objections. Subsequently, everyone lay on the ground, soaked to the bone. Soon, sweet snores echoed within the cave. Liang Yue was accustomed to cultivating at night, so he was assigned the task of keeping watch. He had no complaints about this. Anyway, while practicing the primal chaos skill, his spirit would always be in a subtle state of extension, perceiving all the surrounding fluctuations in silence. His bodily functions seemed dormant, yet maintained a critical point where he could explode interaction at any time regardless of feeling, hearing, and other human senses. They could all be gradually adjusted back to their best state during the practice of the primal chaos dance, unless another opportunity for selfless enlightenment like the one he had experienced in the outpost world were to appear. Liang Yue in cultivation was definitely the most suitable person to keep watch. Soon, it was late into the night. The people in the cave were now in a deep sleep, and even the originally loud snores had begun to fade away. However, at this moment, a faint rustling sound suddenly echoed in the cave. They were here. Liang Yue, who was constantly paying attention to all the surrounding sounds, suddenly opened his eyes, glanced at the fine sand on the ground that was gradually sinking like a centipede, and the corners of his mouth curved slightly. What's wrong, Liang Yue? Where's the enemy? Thorin, holding the battle axe beside him, turned his gaze over. It's the ground. There's something happening on the ground. Just then, a cracking sound suddenly came from beneath the cave floor. Hearing the sound, everyone quickly looked down and subconsciously retreated. But before they could retreat to a safe enough distance, the ground suddenly rolled over, and slabs of rock suddenly flipped down, revealing a deep, dark pit trap below. Ah! Everyone be careful. The dwarves didn't have time to react. Flailing their arms and legs, they fell down one after another. Although Liang Yue had been prepared, he didn't plan to escape alone. Instead, he grabbed Bilbo Baggins beside him, and also pretended to be unable to dodge, falling into the trap with everyone. However, unlike the surrounding dwarves, he maintained his balance throughout the fall, like skiing. Even though the trap passage was unusually smooth and the orientation was uncertain, it didn't cause him to fall, or even stumble. Even the little hobbit in his hand benefited greatly from this, and was not harmed in any way compared to the dwarves around him, who were directly turned into tumbling gourds, spinning around and rolling down in every possible way. This treatment was simply heaven and earth apart. Finally, when the trap passage reached its end, after a brief moment of suspension, everyone crashed to the ground. Just as the dwarves were still dizzy and seeing stars, almost the moment they landed, a group of goblins who had been waiting for a long time nearby howled and rushed over. Fortunately, Liang Yue had remained conscious after landing. He directly threw Bilbo in his hand on the ground, then with a flip of his sleeve, 2 standard long swords suddenly appeared in his hands facing the surging goblins rushing towards him. Liang Yue had a look of great interest on his face, took a few big steps forward, and wielding the 2 swords in his hands, like herding ducks, slashed left and right, without any skill at all compared to the previous disaster-level encounter. The goblins in front of him, who were shorter than hobbits and had frail physiques, had almost no momentum at all. At most, they could only rely on their numerical advantage to play a group brawl tactic with him. Liang Yue was like a rock rooted on the seashore. No matter how turbulent the waves or how surging the crowd, he remained unmoved, blocking the way forward with a longsword in his hand. The cold light radiated everywhere. Wherever the blade passed, the goblins fell to the ground screaming, like crops of leeks. Swish swish swish. In just a few breaths, the smell of blood began to rise in this underground cave. The dwarves behind him had also slowly returned to normal at this time, and began to help Liang Yue resist the surging enemies like a flood under the leadership of Thorn. As time passed, the situation was slowly tilting towards their side. However, to be honest, although the goblins in front of them were inherently lacking in combat talent, had weak bodies, and almost none of the individuals had mastered any combat skills, only knowing to rush up headlessly. But their fighting will really shocked everyone. Even after being repeatedly slashed, falling to the ground and wailing, they were still able to maintain a strong desire to attack without retreating. This situation even made Liang Yue, at some point, think of the scene when he faced the zombie tide in the apocalypse world. Fortunately, the number of goblins was not as large as the zombies. After nearly 100 of them were continuously beheaded, and the corpses covered the road in front of them, the front of everyone's vision finally began to become clear. We need to leave here as soon as possible. These goblins are too crazy. There must be more of them on the way. The white-bearded dwarf wiped the sweat from his forehead, gasped for breath, and approached Thorn to say. Liang Yue then put away his swords and kicked the corpses piled up into hills in front of him. Suddenly, a large number of broken limbs and arms immediately rolled off the cliff from the road in front of them. Everyone was in a bottomless cave. The surroundings were dark, like a natural cave, and the goblins had dug out simple roads at intervals. Torches would illuminate the limited space around. Ropes and wooden planks formed suspension bridges, connecting the cliffs to each other, up and down, left and right, forming a rather complex underground project, making it impossible to see the edge at a glance. Between the dim and bright firelight, groups of goblins were surging towards them from all the surrounding roads, making sharp howls in their mouths, constantly echoing in the mountain rock cave walls. Let's go. Keely, Nori, you follow me to open the way in front. Liang Yue, I'll leave the rear to you, no problem. Chapter 144 Unlimited Water Source Landing Method. Soon, the entire team entered battle mode. The dwarves led by Thorin, since they were chosen by this prince, were naturally the elite warriors of the clan. The combat power displayed by a dozen thick-skinned, stocky, and capable dwarf warriors working together was definitely not something these cave goblins could match, especially in the narrow and long cliff walls like the one before them. They could better exert their advantages. At this moment, the dwarves pushed and shoved each other, holding knives, axes, and scavenged wooden spears, their short legs churning as they charged forward. Wherever they passed, goblins were either hacked to death on the spot or directly overturned to the side, falling off the cliff beside the road. For a time, this entire dwarf expedition team, working together, was like an armored war chariot, unstoppable and invincible. Liang Yue, who was at the rear of the team, suddenly found himself with nothing to do, except occasionally sweep his long sword to cut down a few goblins that sporadically caught up from behind. He was also responsible for protecting the melon-eating little brother Bilbo Baggins behind him, Keeping up with the team's pace, this kind of life change with almost no transition would be uncomfortable for anyone. Being able to have a big heart like he does now, barely keeping up with the rhythm of the people around him, is actually already very good. However, since Liang Yue came to this team as contract mercenaries who were also foreign intruders, and were also introduced by Gandalf compared to each other, Bilbo was naturally dwarfed. In addition, during the entire team's march, Liang Yue's intentional or unintentional actions had invisibly eliminated the contradictions and unstable factors in the team, greatly reducing the role in effect that the little hobbit was originally supposed to play. Under this circumstance, Bilbo's sense of existence had indeed begun to become dispensable. Speaking of which, shouldn't I also appropriately reduce my role and let this little hobbit show his strengths, at least so that the others in the team don't think that when he takes his 1/15th share of the spoils afterward according to the contract, he's just here for the ride. Just as Liang Yue was casually slashing monsters, completely blocking the goblins' attacks from behind with his sword, and was still thinking about things in a daze led by Thorin, the entire team had arrived at a wooden bridge located between two cliffs, with several undulating stone pillars standing in the middle. At this time, the surrounding goblins had gathered more and more, densely packed, occupying most of the cliffs and paths in everyone's sight, and almost blocking the entire road ahead. Even with the dwarves' battle formation offensive, they were temporarily unable to break through the encirclement and could only stand on the undulating suspension bridge, advancing forward little by little. However, the rear of the team, which Liang Yue was responsible for, was as stable as ever on the narrow bridge. The double swords in his hand were like two scythes reaping lives, and each slash could directly cut all the goblins on the bridge in front of him in two. It was as if he was harvesting weeds. In the distance, some goblins who were standing far away on the high cliff paths, watching their clansmen constantly losing their lives and still struggling to move forward. Some had even begun to go crazy. They bared their teeth and howled sharply in this direction, holding wooden sticks and stones in their hands, throwing them down one after another. Unfortunately, the final result of these almost powerless sundries was, at best, a few crisp sounds on Liang Yue's armor. This kind of disruptive offensive seemed so weak. After a while, the dwarves finally advanced to a stone pillar in the middle of the cliff facing the still surging tide of goblins. Everyone was already slightly panting at this time, but the advanced speed of the entire team had not dropped at all. Thorin showed a brave and strong side of himself as a dwarf prince at this time. At this moment, he held a battle axe in one hand and a beast-biting sword in the other, looking like a madman, constantly hacking and killing the goblins in front of him. Even Liang Yue couldn't help but look at him with admiration for this high-spirited fighting spirit. The dwarves behind him were even more infected by his momentum, each striving to be the first, fearless, and desperately slashing the weapons in their hands at the enemies in front. However, at this moment, an unexpected change occurred. A sound of gears turning and friction, mixed in this chaotic hacking and killing, seemed inconspicuous. However, Liang Yue, relying on his keen hearing, still captured this slight sound of abnormality. Mechanism? These goblins really like to play fancy tricks. However, before he could check where the change had occurred, the originally stable stone pillar under his feet began to shake violently in an instant. Immediately afterward, the pillar began to crack, collapse, and then quickly fall towards the deep cliff below. The dwarves behind him also noticed this change at this time, shouting and striving to advance forward, finally leaping to the opposite stone pillar on the suspension bridge before the stone surface collapsed. However, Liang Yue and Bilbo in the rear, because they were relatively far away, and because of the goblins' almost endless entanglement, both fell off the suspension bridge at the moment of approaching the abyss. Liang Yue, who was in a state of weightlessness, quickly glanced around, and then twisted his body awkwardly, raised his foot and stomped hard in the air. Subsequently, his entire person rushed diagonally to the side of the little hobbit, who was also in free fall, separating his 5 fingers, grabbing his collar. After a spin and effort, he threw him into the air forcefully finally, before completely falling off the cliff. With a faint firelight above, Liang Yue clearly saw Bilbo Baggins' figure being firmly grasped in the hands of the 2 dwarves standing on the edge of the stone pillar. In this way, he can leave peacefully. Liang Yue, accompanied by a crisp sound of rushing water. Then Liang Yue landed steadily on the ground. There was no other way. The infinite water source mechanism of Mook was so magical. Each unit of water was a source that could infinitely flow out of water. This mechanism gave its users too many possibilities, and the power of water far exceeded the imagination of ordinary people. Think about Star-Lord, who went to that withered planet to find the cosmic orb. In the end, that idiot, when driving a spaceship that could travel freely in the universe, was about to accelerate away, a subterranean fountain in the lower position directly caused his spaceship to malfunction, and then, relying solely on inertia, it lifted the hull into the air for a good distance. Now, the lifting force of the single-cell water source in Liang Yue's hand may not be as strong as the fountain on that planet, but if it is only to lift him alone, there is no problem at all. There was no other way. This was the experience that countless predecessors had explored with their lives, and you couldn't refuse it. Subsequently, at the moment of landing on the ground, Liang Yue turned his arm and scooped the iron bucket at the water source next to him. Suddenly, that unit of water was taken back into the bucket by this guy. Looking around at this time, Liang Yue looked at the still remaining wet mud on the ground, as well as the water stains deposited in the stone nests, and suddenly shook his head with a sigh. Immediately, this guy put his hands behind his back and began to slowly walk along the potholed path between the stones, continuing into the deep underground. Chapter 145: The One Ring. Walking in the dim underground world, Liang Yue did not choose to light a torch at this time, because after his eyes gradually adapted to the surrounding environment, this guy was surprised to find this underground world actually has light. During the walking process, Liang Yue even found several large mushroom clusters growing sporadically on the ground with abundant water vapor and oil deposits. The cap of each mushroom was as big as two of his heads. He used an observation skill on them, and after confirming that these mushrooms were not poisonous and were said to be delicious, this guy leisurely collected a batch and threw them into the underground tunnels in the stronghold world, letting them grow on their own. Slowly advancing along the path of the underground crevice, Liang Yue pressed his feet tightly against the ground, trying not to make any noise, while also trying to listen to all the movements around him. He had only walked for a short while when he captured a trace of strange noise between the deep underground rock walls. Immediately, Liang Yue narrowed his eyes, and a gleam of light burst out from his pupils. Unconsciously, he began to speed up his pace, walking quickly in the direction from which the sound came. After about a few minutes, this guy arrived at a relatively open rocky beach, and looking around, his sight was almost filled with sharp rocks with jagged edges. On these rocks, there were densely packed corpses of goblins, either stuck or lying down, all incomplete. Looking at the cut marks on the wounds, many of the corpses should have been cut out by Liang Yue with his sword. There was no way around it. The characteristics were too obvious. That kind of enemy-killing method of directly splitting the body in two, probably only he could do it here. Speaking of which, these corpses should have fallen directly from the cliff above, right? Thinking of this, Liang Yue subconsciously looked up. Even with his eyesight, he only saw a patch of darkness and could not find anything. In other words, there should still be many obstructing boulders in the middle of this cliff. It seems that I was quite lucky to fall directly from the cliff to the underground. Excellent, excellent. Today, Golem's luck is really excellent. So much meat has fallen from the sky, enough for Golem to eat for a long time, but Golem better skin it early, remove the internal organs, and then make it into jerky, otherwise the meat will spoil quickly. Cold air. I see stinging palms, biting soles, giant rocks and stones like bones. No meat, no clothes, cold dead bodies, lifeless. Just as Liang Yue was standing at the edge of the rocky beach, planning the route back, a strange, rhythmic song suddenly came from within the rocky beach. This voice was hoarse with a bit of shrillness, giving people a strange feeling under the reverberation of this deep and dark stone wall. It actually created a somewhat eerie and terrifying atmosphere in this underground world. However, Liang Yue naturally would not have any terrifying emotions. On the contrary, he was a little excited at this time, because fear always comes from the unknown, and at this time, Liang Yue clearly knew whose throat the voice came from. Golem, a complete tragic character. Through the gaps in the rocky thorns, Liang Yue quickly saw that short figure on top of a stone. It is said that Golem was once a hobbit. One day, he and his companions discovered the One Ring, which was sunk in the sand at the bottom of the river, and he was tempted to kill his companion. From then on, he began to hide in the mountains alone. It is said that after Golem obtained the One Ring, he was always in a trance, enslaved by the ring, until he later split into two personalities. One of them is Golem, who is actually a slave incarnation controlled by the ring. The remaining second personality is a weakened version of his personality as a hobbit, still retaining some conscience and reason. It is said that after Golem obtained the One Ring, although his personality changed greatly and his image became extremely wretched and strange, he lived for more than 500 years by relying on the power of this ring. Destroying it can directly end the life of that Dark Lord, but before that, I think I should try it myself to see if I can turn his magic power into my own. Thinking of this, Liang Yue no longer hesitated. Stepping on the ground, his whole person suddenly leaped onto a large rock in front of him. Looking at the mumbling little monster not far away, whose skin had completely turned pale due to years of living underground and lack of sunlight. This guy couldn't help but feel a little emotional. His whole life is a tragedy. It's better to let him be free here afterwards. Liang Yue stepped on the ground continuously, leaping between the tops of the stones. In just a few breaths, he had quietly arrived in front of the other party. Golem, who is it? Who is there? A human? Ha, how do you know Golem's name? I also know a lot about you, but I'm here for the One Ring this time. The One Ring. What is that? Golem doesn't seem to have seen it. The One Ring is the treasure you put in your pocket. What? Human, you dare to covet Golem's precious. Today, Golem will eat you. Want to eat me? Not so easy. Looks like you really put the precious in your pocket. Looking at Golem squatting on the sharp rock in front of him, subconsciously covering his groin pocket, Liang Yue suddenly felt that the other party seemed a bit silly and cute, enslaved by the One Ring for a lifetime. It seems that besides this ring, he has never cared about anything else in his entire life. In view of this, when Liang Yue originally wanted to say a few more words to the other party, Golem couldn't help but succumb to the anger in his heart, spreading his hands, baring his teeth, and pounds directly at him. But thinking about it, it's right. After all, the so-called precious is the most important thing in the other party's life. Since Liang Yue dared to covet the other party's precious in front of him, then, the relationship between the two parties is undoubtedly that of mortal enemies, and there is no room for compromise. Wush is a hobbit who was only seduced and corrupted by the power of the One Ring. He naturally doesn't possess any particularly superb combat skills. Facing Golem's beast-like pounce, Liang Yue didn't dodge. With a flick of his sleeve, after a mere horizontal sweep of the longsword in his hand, the other party's entire head flew into the air. Finally, with a crash, it fell into the lake below. In the process of blood splattering, there was surprisingly little vitality, as if the blood flowing in his blood vessels was cold in itself. After only a few splashes, it fell weakly on the stone along with his falling body. Ding-a-ling. Whether it was a coincidence or not, the moment Golem's body landed, a golden ring immediately fell out of his pocket just like that, hopping and jumping, rolling and spiraling. It came to Liang Yue's feet. The One Ring. It is said that it has always wanted to return to Soren's side, and for this reason, it did not hesitate to seduce Golem. Who knew that that kid was too hopeless and actually holed up in this underground lake for hundreds of years? Presumably, you have long wanted to change masters, right? Looking at the One Ring at his feet, Liang Yue didn't hesitate at all, directly bent down to pick it up, and brought it to his eyes. The moment his fingers touched the ring, Liang Yue, relying on his keen senses, almost immediately noticed a mental force trying to break through his body and invade his brain. Unfortunately, as soon as it came into contact with his skin, that mental force disappeared without a trace, like a clay ox entering the sea. Just you. Merely a magical item from this low magic world, and you dare to seduce me? If you really succeeded, where would the system's face be? Looking at the One Ring in front of him, which was shining golden light on the inner edge of the ring, forming a string of elvish mortar language, Liang Yue immediately rolled his eyes. Immediately, he threw an observation skill onto the thing. The One Ring, a magical ring created by a native demigod-level creature from Middle-earth using elven craftsmanship, containing most of the necromancer Soren's magic. It has the ability to preserve the wearer's life force and will from being lost, and can be used to control the remaining sub-rings. Only the ring's creator, Soren, can use all of its power. In addition, it also has the ability to seduce, communicate mentally, and make the wearer invisible. Mental communication? Is this the ability that Bilbo and Frodo had to understand animal language and spider language after putting on the ring? Basically, it overlaps somewhat with my language mastery skill. Twisting the golden ring between his fingers, Liang Yue then communicated with the system with a hint of luck. System, can you help me extract the magic power from this ring? It would be even better if it could be directly transformed into my own thing. Please explore on your own. Hostess, I knew you would say that. Unconsciously pursing his lips, looking at the ring between his fingers, Liang Yue hesitated slightly before putting it on his left index finger. In an instant, Liang Yue only felt a blur in front of his eyes, a buzzing sound in his head, and his whole person seemed to enter a strange world all at once. In his current vision, it no longer seemed to be a simple world with only material structures. Strands of blurry and viscous substances were attached to people's bodies. Liang Yue could vaguely distinguish that it was a manifestation of the soul and spiritual power of a biological individual, not unique, very superficial, but also very exquisite. Preliminary judgment. The reason why this ring makes people invisible is probably because it can allow the wearer to temporarily enter the soul world, which is in a state of fusion and separation with reality. Therefore, The One Ring's invisibility ability is ineffective against the 9 ring wraiths, because they have already been transformed into undead creatures, and it is naturally ineffective against the Dark Lord Soren because Soren himself is a necromancer who has initially mastered the research topic of the soul domain. That's probably the explanation. Chapter 146 Goblin King. After obtaining this supreme magic ring, Liang Yue didn't excessively indulge in it. He merely held it in his hand and played with it for a while before gradually losing interest. Firstly, he already knew the nature of this ring and that its ultimate goal was to tempt him and then, using his convenience, attempt to return to Soren's side. In modern terms, it's like a thankless wretch that can never be satisfied. Secondly, although this magic ring is touted as supreme, its abilities are not particularly outstanding. Invisibility, mental communication, and even maintaining the wearer's vitality and will, while they seem decent now, are at most superficial abilities in the vast expanse of the myriad realms. The ability to maintain vitality is quite interesting, but since getting the system, I've never worried about vitality. Speaking of which, the ability for the wearer to travel to the soul world is somewhat similar to the soul-absorbing bracelet I gave to senior sister Zizu before. However, this magic ring can only enter the soul world, while the soul-absorbing bracelet allows people to see the surface of the soul world and then absorb the power of the soul in a general way for their own use. Tisk, this wizard's skills are truly bizarre, either contacting the soul or communicating with the spirit, all just flashy tricks. There isn't a single proper magic based on the 5 elements or earth, wind, water, and fire. After a moment of silent reflection, Liang Yue then threw the ring, which constantly sought to extend its mental power onto him to tempt and control him, into a storage space in that environment where time remained still. It should allow this little thing to calm down a bit. Subsequently, Liang Yue raised his head and looked towards the upper part of this area, where it was dark and gloomy. Even with his eyesight, it was difficult to discern the twists and turns of the path, but that was the only way to return to the goblin lair. I have to go back, not just to rescue Thorn and the dwarves, or to protect Bilbo Baggins' safety, but even just for the sake of the Goblin King's elite chieftain's head. I have to climb back now, and I have to be quick, otherwise, according to the plot's development, that Goblin King will probably die at the hands of the old wizard Gandalf who comes to rescue them at that time. This kill count. Thinking of this, Liang Yue no longer hesitated and quickly scanned the surrounding step with a few leaps. He arrived in front of a stone wall. Pressing his 5 fingers against the uneven rocks in front of him, he exerted force with his feet, and his entire body shot up 7 or 8 meters. At this moment, Liang Yue's fingers and claws were like hooks. With a gentle touch, his whole body was firmly attached to the wall. With his legs bent, he continued to jump upwards with each movement. It looked like a frog walking vertically. Before long, his entire body disappeared into the darkness above. At the same time, after losing Liang Yue's rearguard and cover, the situation faced by the dwarves began to take a sharp turn for the worse. They not only had to face the goblins constantly attacking from behind, had to spare energy to protect the safety of the little hobbit, but also had to rationally allocate the little physical strength they had left. But there were simply too many goblins in this underground world from the original script. The place where Thorn and the others were now was actually the lair of a goblin kingdom. In terms of scale, it might not be comparable to the kingdoms of the dwarves, elves, and humans outside, but even a kingdom with a smaller scale was not something that they, a dozen or so dwarves, could push through all the way. Therefore, facing the endless siege of goblins, not long after Liang Yue fell off the cliff, Thorn and the others were still captured by a group of goblins due to being outnumbered. Thorin, son of Thrain, grandson of Thrur. Oh, I almost forgot. You don't have a mountain now, and you're no longer a king. You're just an unknown nobody, worthless. You've even changed your name for yourself, Thorn Oakenshield. That name is disgusting, but just now I received a message that someone is offering a high price to bounty your head. Of course, they only want the head, not any other parts. You should know who I'm talking about, right? It's your old rival, the Pale Orc, the one riding the White Warg King Azog the Defiler. I killed him a long time ago on the battlefield. Hey, you only cut off one of his arms. Seems to be the left hand. Now he's fitted himself with a prosthetic limb, just like your Oakenshield. Seems to be made of some kind of wood too. Of course that's not important. What's important is that he still holds a grudge against you. Head. Immediately send a message to the Pale Orc, tell him that Thorn is in my hands, and have him prepare a good price. As for these other dwarves, you've killed hundreds of my people. You should already be prepared to accept punishment, right? Flay them. Disassemble their bones. Chop them up. Cook them in an iron pot. Distribute them to my beloved people. Awoo. As the Goblin King's voice fell, countless goblins around began to howl wildly. Those goblins who were originally restraining the dwarves now began to whip and scratch Thorn and the others. However, the little hobbit Bilbo Baggins was miraculously ignored by the surrounding goblins. At this moment, he was quickly crawling through the gaps between people and various short legs, the short sword in his hand emitting a sparkling blue light. Soon, he crawled to the side of the dwarf Gimli, and seeing the goblins around him constantly grabbing and biting him, a look of determination flashed across his face. Without any hesitation, he raised the sword in his hand and began to slash at them. Unfortunately, Bilbo's strength was too weak. Even though he was holding the finest weapon made by the elves, he could only cut a few shallow wounds on the goblins in front of him, but his actions ultimately saved the lives of his companions in front of him. After being rescued, the dwarf Gimli finally temporarily escaped the suppression of the goblins. In this moment of life and death, he quickly crawled up from the ground without time to thank Bilbo beside him. After identifying the direction, he rushed towards the goblins who were whipping the white-bearded dwarf next to him. With a full leap with his two short legs, he directly rammed into them sideways with his body. Bang! A group of goblins were knocked flying by the huge force, and the white-bearded dwarf also climbed up, panting heavily. Fortunately, a battle axe was lying on the ground not far from him. After an agile roll, the white-bearded dwarf got the weapon. He howled and swung it towards the group of goblins next to him, and in a few moves, he drove them back. Two more dwarves were released from suppression. Immediately afterwards, they punched and kicked, charged and bumped, picked up the scattered walking sticks and horns on the ground, and slammed them against the goblins in front of them, forcing them to retreat constantly. Another weapon appeared on the ground, which was the artifact forged by the High Elves, Orcrist. The dwarf Gimli rolled on the spot at this time and took the sword in his hand. Clang! As the long sword was unsheathed, the strange sound of the sword immediately made the surrounding goblins feel like they were stabbed in the back, and they retreated in horror. I recognize that sword. It has killed thousands of orcs on the battlefield. It is Orcrist. Not far away, the Goblin King, who had been watching the chaotic scene below with a calm face, now showed an unexpected look of horror on his face, full of fat, and subconsciously retreated again and again. The surrounding goblins were even more unbearable, each with stiff bodies, as if they were subjected to some kind of invisible shock. As a result, even the dwarves who were originally suppressed on the ground were relieved of pressure for a time. The dwarf Prince Thorn seized this opportunity, kicked over 4 or 5 goblins in a row, and quickly climbed up from the ground. Thorn catch. Seeing this, Gimli was immediately overjoyed, and hurriedly threw Orcrist in his hand towards the other party. Under the fearful gaze of the surrounding goblins, the sword spun in the air and was finally held by Thorn. A flash of light, and 2 goblin heads flew into the air. As the stinking blood splashed, Thorn was now quickly wandering on the battlefield, roaring incessantly. Orcrist seemed weightless in his hands, and he swung it repeatedly, with broken limbs and arms flying in all directions. The surrounding goblins were intimidated by this momentum and retreated in screams. All the dwarves now finally stood up from the ground. They picked up their respective weapons, stood back to back, and surrounded the little hobbit in the middle. In this way, covered in scars, they confronted the massive number of goblins around them. For a time, the atmosphere in the field was quiet and heavy, like the calm before the storm. Boom! At this moment, a shocking white light suddenly burst from one side of the cliff cave wall with strong impact and deterrent power. Like a sudden gale of level 12, a large number of goblins and wooden buildings were thrown out, and even the dwarves were not spared, and they were knocked to the ground. Their minds were dizzy, their eyes were erratic, and they looked as if they had suffered heavy damage. When the white light slowly faded and the hurricane had settled, a figure slowly walked over from the dim light. He was tall and thin, holding a staff in one hand and a long sword in the other. Under the illumination of the lights, he gradually appeared in front of everyone. Chapter 147 Escape. Needless to say, the person who came was Gandalf. After a period of hurried travel, the old wizard finally returned to the group at a critical moment. Pick up your weapons and fight. After glancing at the dwarves lying on the ground, Gandalf shouted loudly, then wielded his staff and sword with both hands. He advanced, killing as he went. Sword light flashed, blood rained down, revealing the true nature of the battle mage. He's holding Orcrist. That sword is as dazzling as sunlight. The Goblin King cowered on the ground, looking at the sword in Gandalf's hand, his face filled with terror. But then his expression suddenly changed, and he pointed fiercely at the old wizard and the dwarves not far away, shouting, "Leave them here. Don't let them escape." "Absolutely not." At that moment, a cold light flashed, shooting swiftly from the side, piercing the Goblin King's throat, completely stopping his unfinished words. Then, with a weak cry, the Goblin King, whose size was like 1,000-pound fatty, fell heavily to the ground. A large amount of blood gushed out from his throat with a poof sound. Hearing the sound, everyone turned to look, only to see a cold, gleaming longsword stuck in the Goblin King's neck. The blade entered from the front at an angle, almost severing half of his thick neck, leaving only a piece of flesh connecting it. Half of the sword body protruded from his back, piercing the Goblin King completely. This sudden change caused the goblins, who were originally attacking frantically, to pause, stopping in their tracks. The dwarves also got a chance to catch their breath. Gradually, under the gazes of the surrounding people, he walked step by step to the Goblin King, grabbed the sword hilt, and kicked the Goblin King's body forcefully with his foot. With a splash of blood, the longsword returned to his control. A sharp scream suddenly rang out around him. No one knew which goblin started it, but the screams instantly merged into one. It contained endless anger. Run! Seeing the situation, Gandalf immediately waved his sleeves at the crowd, then strode away, running in the direction they had come from. Naturally, the dwarves weren't stupid either. They immediately moved their short legs, chasing after the old wizard's agile figure, swarming away. Only the little hobbit Bilbo Baggins was still standing there, looking excitedly and foolishly at the suddenly appearing Liang Yue. However, before he could even say a word, someone grabbed him by the back of his collar and quickly caught up with the end of the group. With a short scream, the surrounding goblins seemed to receive an order to attack, and they recovered from their previous shock. Screaming, baring their fangs and claws, they chased after Liang Yue and the others in the direction they left. Led by Gandalf, the group behind him ran wildly, although the speed was not as fast as when Thorin led the team before. Gandalf seemed to know the correct route by heart. When facing the chaotic and complex road conditions of the Goblin Cave, every turn and change of route was so smooth and decisive. Of course, no matter how well the old wizard knew the way, he certainly couldn't compare to the native goblins here. In addition, the goblins who were originally gathered on the surrounding roads blocked the path ahead again in a short time. At this moment, Gandalf, who was previously acting like a fierce battle mage, holding a staff in his left hand and a sword in his right, suddenly did something no one expected. It took a few steps back, then turned around and shouted loudly, "Liang Yue, you lead the way." Your sister. Hearing this, Liang Yue rolled his eyes and twitched the corner of his mouth a few times. However, at this critical moment of being surrounded by a large number of enemies, he didn't hesitate. He jogged a few steps forward, then pushed hard with his feet. The whole person was like riding a gust of wind, leaning sideways, stepping on the uneven wall, and came to the front of the team. In the process, the little hobbit, who had been held in his hand, was directly thrown to the dwarves below. After landing, Liang Yue flipped his sleeves, and two long swords were immediately in his grasp. Looking at the goblins not far away, baring their teeth and howling at him, the corner of his mouth suddenly curved into a cruel smile. His legs bent slightly, and then his whole body shot forward violently. Whoosh! Puff puff! Slap slap! Liang Yue was like a heavy crossbow bolt flying. When charging, he didn't care how many enemies were blocking the way, and charged straight up. The swords in his hands waved rapidly, creating an airtight sharp blade in front of him wherever he passed. Broken limbs and arms were scattered everywhere. The goblins were like being swept away by a meat grinder and a siege hammer. A large number of corpses, limbs, heads, half-bodies, and even living goblins were knocked flying. In just a few breaths, the narrow cliff path was completely cleared. Go left. When Liang Yue rushed to a fork in the road, Gandalf, who couldn't keep up with his speed, gestured and pointed him while running. Hearing this, Liang Yue naturally didn't hesitate. He turned his body to the left and continued to wield his swords, charging forward. Go right. Go forward. Keep going forward. Go down. Run slower. Liang Yue, huff, the exit is ahead. In this way, under the guidance of Gandalf behind him, Liang Yue led the way and was the first to run out of the Goblin Cave, facing the bright sunshine of the cave entrance. At this time, the time outside had unknowingly come to the afternoon. Under the clear sky, what appeared in front of him was a series of rolling hills and an almost endless forest. Subconsciously, Liang Yue closed his eyes, opened his arms, welcoming the forest breeze, accompanied by the rustling of pine needles rubbing against each other, in a carefree manner. However, before he could enjoy this peaceful moment for long, a strong bloody smell suddenly drilled into his nostrils. Smelling the pungent stench, Liang Yue frowned subconsciously at this time. He knew without even opening his eyes that the source of the smell must be from himself. However, he still opened his eyes and looked down at the armor on his chest. He saw that the armor, which should have been shining brightly in the sun, was now covered with a large amount of blood. Strands of minced meat and skin were tightly attached to the diamond-shaped forged surface, mixed with gray hair. There was even a pale eyeball stuffed on the leather of his waist. Just one look would make people feel nauseous. What to do? Quickly find a place to clean up, and then take a good bath. Just as he was thinking this, a chaotic sound of footsteps suddenly came from the cave behind him. Liang Yue immediately stepped aside, and then a series of embarrassed figures darted out of the cave. Then, the dwarves, Gandalf, Bilbo, and others supported their waists one by one, panting heavily, making a series of exclamations as if they had been reborn. Before everyone could calm down and recover for a while, Thorin spoke up immediately. Although it's temporarily safe now, we can't stop. Keep going. Find a place to rest after leaving this mountain. After speaking, Thorin nodded to everyone, then started walking and ran down the hillside. First seeing this, the others didn't say much nonsense, because everyone knew that this was indeed the most correct choice for them now, so they all braced their tired bodies and ran after him. Time passed quickly. When the sun slowly set and the light in the forest began to dim slowly, they stopped again, collapsing to the ground exhausted. No one spoke, only focusing on breathing and resting. After a moment, Liang Yue stood up, came to the middle of the crowd, wearing a body of blood that had already congealed and dried. With a wave of his hand, he placed a pile of meat patties, fruits, and a bucket of milk there. He took a beef patty himself, then walked to a tree and slowly ate it. Seeing this, the others cheered, flattering him with words of praise without hesitation, and then began to replenish their bodies with nutrition. Chapter 148. Meet the Wolf Riders again. Thank you, Liang Yue. If it weren't for you before, I'm afraid I would have lost my life. Just as Liang Yue was sitting there, slowly swallowing shredded meat with a few strawberries, Bilbo walked over with a glass of milk in his hand, looking at him with gratitude. It's okay, we're teammates. Mutual rescue is what we should do. The cliff before didn't pose much of a threat to me. Moreover, because of this fall to the underground, I actually got some unexpected gains. Liang Yue heard this, patted the other person's shoulder, and responded with a smile. What gains, Liang Yue? Things that can be valued by you are probably not simple, right? To be honest, I was really surprised when you jumped up from the bottom of the cliff before. The white-bearded dwarf was leaning against a rock at this time, trying to calm his breathing, looking at him with a face full of smiles. Yeah, I thought before that even if you were strong, you would be injured after falling off the cliff. But now you are completely fine. It's amazing. I think so too. What did you get underground? Take it out and let us see. Yeah, could it be that you found a gem mine? Amidst the uproar of the surrounding people, Liang Yue smiled lightly. Then, with a flip of his sleeve, he took out the one ring from the storage space, held it between his thumb and index finger, and slowly showed it to everyone. Just such a small ring? It looks very ordinary. It looks like it's gold, but the surface is very smooth. I don't know how much it can sell for. How could there be such a ring at the bottom of the cliff? Could it be that the goblins accidentally dropped it? Those guys are sloppy. They probably don't even know what a ring is. It's normal not to cherish it. Amidst a pile of people's chatter, the One Ring, which has a great reputation in Middle-earth, was actually described by them as an ordinary gold ring. Liang Yue was speechless about this. However, among these people around, not everyone is ignorant. For example, the dwarf Prince Thorin, at this time, has a fascinated look on his face, his eyes fixed on the magic ring in Liang Yue's hand, and he has unconsciously started to walk slowly towards him. And also, the old wizard Gandalf. Almost the first time Liang Yue took out this ring, his originally leisurely face leaning on the tree trunk smoking immediately stiffened. The look in his eyes looking at the magic ring even slowly began to carry a hint of panic. What's wrong with you? Thorin, a sturdy dwarf with black braids next to him, although he didn't recognize what the ring in Liang Yue's hand was, he was always paying attention to Thorin, who was staggering over seeing Thorin's expression as if he was possessed. Forgetting himself and everything else, the black-braided dwarf subconsciously noticed something was wrong and immediately stood up and hugged him. Who knew that in the next moment, he was directly pushed away by Thorin. What's going on, Liang Yue? Gandalf, the little hobbit next to him, was very little affected, just blinking his eyes occasionally, shaking his head, looking dazed. After the ring was put away, he directly returned to normal. Liang Yue, where did you get that ring? At this time, the old wizard Gandalf's face looked very gloomy, and his expression was even more unusually solemn, no longer the kind and benevolent appearance he usually had. There was a little guy named Gollum, who should be the last poor man who was tempted by the One Ring. When I met him in the underground world, I solved him easily. This ring fell out of his pocket. Liang Yue at this time glanced at Thorin, who was gradually waking up with the help of everyone next to him, and replied casually. Gandalf heard this, took 2 hard puffs of his pipe, and after being silent for a while, continued to ask, can you resist the temptation of that magic ring? I have my own guarding power. The temptation of the magic ring has no effect on me, Alice. That's good. Magic ring? Was the golden ring in Liang Yue's hand just now the legendary One Ring? No wonder, its magic is indeed irresistible. Thorin at this time completely recovered from the abnormality just now. At this moment, his eyes were filled with some fear and confusion, and he subconsciously rubbed his temples and said, actually, the reason why you were in that state just now, the problem still lies with yourself, Thorin. In comparison, the reactions of other people were not as serious as yours. Looking at the dwarf prince opposite, Liang Yue at this time took a bite of the meat pie in his hand, with a somewhat playful expression. The problem lies with myself. It's because the desires in your heart are a bit too heavy, so you gave the One Ring an opportunity to take advantage of, starting from the aspect you most urgently want to obtain, and conducting spiritual guidance on you. Revenge, power, money, or even the desire for glory, may be used by the power of the ring. But in the end, it just wants to use the convenience of the wearer to return to the side of the Dark Lord Soren. Yes, I crave powerful strength, so that I can take back the capital of the kingdom under the mountain sooner. Everyone craves to have strength, but don't place your hopes on this ring, because other than its creator, others after wearing the One Ring, the convenience that can be obtained is probably only the ability to become invisible in disguise, the ability to communicate mentally with creatures, the ability to eliminate language barriers, and also, it can allow you to retain a period of vitality. Apart from this ring can neither teach you magic, nor can it give you a stronger body, nor can it give you a powerful talent. In my opinion, except for the invisibility ability, it is just a disobedient magic tool. Saying this, Liang Yue once again took out the golden ring, and just let it lie in the palm of his hand. Suddenly, from the moment this magic ring appeared in this world, an invisible mental wave immediately emanated from this ring. Only this time, after everyone had a certain amount of psychological preparation, their resistance to the One Ring was indeed greatly improved. Thorin was no longer the fool who wanted to possess it just by looking at it once. Only the old wizard Gandalf was still sitting far away under the tree. After glancing at the ring, he began to tremble all over, like a little old man with epilepsy. Later, even the pipe in his hand almost couldn't hold it. Finally, Gandalf couldn't help it, and had to tremble his lips and shout loudly to Liang Yue, put it away quickly. Liang Yue, not everyone is immune to this thing like you. The stronger the creature, the lower the resistance to this ring. I think you can treat this as a kind of tempering, Gandalf. It must be very effective to be tempted by it while sitting aside and cultivating mental strength. Looking at the old wizard's shrinking appearance, Liang Yue continued to tease him. This is not the same thing at all. Why not? As the saying goes, everything is possible. Woo. Just at this time, a sudden wolf howl interrupted the conversation between the two. Liang Yue heard the sound, his face changed slightly, and he immediately stood up from the stone, and put the magic ring back into the storage space. That's the Orc Warg Riders. It's really one wave after another. Let's go, run quickly. At this time, Gandalf, whose emotions still seemed a little unstable, glanced in the direction of the sound, immediately shouted to everyone, and then ran down the slope behind him. When the others saw this, naturally they did not dare to neglect. After all, everyone had just escaped from the goblin lair, and most of the time in the middle was spent running and rushing, and their physical strength was severely depleted. They had only stopped to rest for a while, and they hadn't even finished eating the meat pie in their hands, when an even more ferocious enemy arrived. According to normal logic, everyone can only turn around and run away at this time. Any fluke thoughts that overestimate oneself are giving up the hope of survival. However, people only have 2 legs after all. In this uneven woodland, it is almost impossible to outrun a wolf with 4 legs. Half of the setting sun on the horizon had already sunk below the mountains, and the light in the forest was rapidly darkening in the intermittent howls of wolves. In just a moment, several wargs had already bitten the tail of the team, and after a jump, they stopped the little hobbit who was running the slowest. Unfortunately, what this giant wolf didn't know was that protecting Bilbo Baggins' safety was one of the important goals of Liang Yue's training. Swish, the crescent-shaped sword light flashed away, and the warg's triangular mouth was immediately divided into 2. The hard skull did not provide any protection for it, and even half of the skull was directly chopped away by this blow. Carrying the little hobbit under his arm, Liang Yue began to run unhurriedly. Intentionally or unintentionally, he placed himself at the rear of the crowd, taking the initiative to take on the responsibility of guarding the rear. Chapter 149, Pale Orc. After a short while, the group finally reached the end of the road, beyond which was a steep cliff. Most of the wargs that had initially pursued them had already been cleared by Liang Yue, but the orc cavalry behind them was still getting closer. Left with no choice, the group had to listen to Gandalf's suggestion and climbed up the nearby trees. Liang Yue didn't make an exception this time either. After placing Bilbo to the side, he squatted on a thick branch, observing the situation below. This scene, why does it feel so familiar? Soon, a large group of orc cavalry arrived less than 50 meters below them. They were led by an orc who was as strong as an ogre, with pale skin and a warg mount that was larger than the average warg. This orc's body was smooth and hairless, with totem-like patterns carved on his chest and back, directly carved by gouging out flesh. His eyes were cold, his expression indifferent, giving off the air of a final boss, warning others to stay away. More importantly, his left hand had been chopped off at the wrist, and now he was wearing a branch shaped like a claw. This figure immediately attracted everyone's attention when it appeared, especially Thorin, the dwarf prince, whose eyes were filled with disbelief, and deep within his eyes, anger was rapidly boiling. Gandalf, the old wizard, after seeing this orc leader for the first time, immediately looked around the tree with a somewhat erratic gaze. At this moment, the little old man was fiddling with a moth with spiral patterns in his hand, muttering something to it with a mystical look on his face. After a while, the moth fluttered its wings and flew away. Facing such an obviously characterized target, Liang Yue had naturally guessed the other party's identity long ago without a doubt. It was Azog the Defiler, the pale orc, head of the orcs. He had publicly beheaded Thorin's grandfather, the elderly dwarf King Thror, during the war with the dwarves, and had also had his left hand chopped off by this young dwarf prince. His reputation was widespread, feared by many races. As the saying goes, when enemies meet, their eyes are especially red. Thorin, who was on the tree at this moment, and Azog on the back of the white warg, were in just such a situation. However, Liang Yue's purpose in taking out the gun at this time was not simply to kill the target, but to test the orc's resistance to bullets. As for why he couldn't kill Azog the pale orc below, nonsense. If he killed him now, who would lead the orc army to harass them in the future? Without Azog, the orc race would inevitably fall into internal strife in a short period of time, maybe a few days, maybe a few months, maybe a few years if they didn't actively bring troops over during this time. Did he have to go find them himself? After the upper limit of 5,000 orcs, each one he killed would be 1 point. How could Liang Yue not seize such an obvious opportunity to grind data, to kill Azog? At least wait until the Battle of 5 Armies. By that time, even if I don't take action to solve him, according to the development of the plot, Thorin will catch up and die with him. Thinking of this, Liang Yue suddenly raised his eyelids, and his 2 fingers unconsciously groped his chin. His gaze lowered slightly, and he looked at the white-furred giant wolf under the pale orc. Speaking of this warg, it seems to be the wolf king of their clan, right? A white wolf king, maybe it's a rare breed. Is this considered a boss monster too? Although I can't kill Azog, it should be no problem to kill his mount, right? With this thought in mind, Liang Yue narrowed his eyes, and the gaze he used to look at the white wolf began to become ambiguous. Faced with someone's malicious attention, the white-furred warg king suddenly seemed to sense something subconsciously. It jumped back a little, then bent its limbs slightly, lowered its body, squeezed out a fierce look, and bared its fangs at Liang Yue. It even let out a low growl of intimidation. Oh, very spiritual. Liang Yue's eyes lit up when he saw the other party's reaction, but then he quickly calmed down. No, it's too ugly, not worth taking as a mount. After soothing the wolf king under him a few times, Azog, who had a lot of acting talent, sniffed deeply in the air at this time, his eyes fixed on Thorin on the tree. Then, he spoke in a deep tone. Do you smell it? It's the smell of fear. I still remember the stench of fear on your father, exactly the same as yours now, Thorin, son of Thrain. Ho ha Azog, I didn't expect you to still be alive. Looking at the enemy who killed his father below, Thorin clenched the orc wrist in his hand at this time, staring at the other party's eyes, his face full of the urge to kill. However, Azog on the back of the white warg didn't keep him waiting for long. A grim look flashed across his face, and he immediately waved his hand at the wolf pack behind him, pointing at Thorin. That one is mine, kill everyone else. As soon as the words fell, a dozen wargs rushed over, roaring and howling, launching an attack on the crowd. Wolves can't climb trees, but wargs have strong jumping and explosive power. Each warg is at least 3 meters long. With a strong kick of its strong hind legs, its front limbs and claws grab the tree trunk, and it can climb at least 6 or 7 meters high. Every time they wave their claws, every time they stomp, every time they tear, they can take away large pieces of wood chips from the tree trunk. This is undoubtedly a huge threat to everyone in the tree. In a few moments, The towering pine trees began to shake violently under the siege of the wolf pack, and large pieces of pine needles fell one after another. The crowd couldn't help but let out bursts of screams and shouts, their faces panicked and nervous. A low gunshot suddenly rang out at this moment under the surrounding fierce wolf howls and the crowd's shouts. It seemed inconspicuous, and the truth was just that. The bursting bullet, after leaving the barrel, accurately hit the brow of a warg below. However, it failed to bring any substantial damage as expected in the dark night. Relying on his superhuman eyesight, Liang Yue clearly saw at this time that the bullet, after passing through the dense hair of the wolf's head, barely broke the tough wolf skin, but was eventually blocked by the hard wolf bone. The sudden pain on its body instead stimulated the ferocity of the beast even more. After roaring, the wolf waved its claws even more fiercely towards the tree where Liang Yue was. Chapter 150. The Elf Woman. Looking at those few below, acting like they were possessed, baring their teeth and barking furiously at him, Liang Yue's lips curled into a mocking smile. Then, the Colt M2000 pistol in his hand immediately rose. Pa. 5 consecutive gunshots, like firecrackers, short and rapid. The gun in his hand was swung into blur in that short moment. Afterward, the 5 warg below immediately fell in response. From their ferocious posture just now, they rolled limply to the ground, becoming silent. There was almost no trace of injury on their bodies, except for their own shattered eyeballs. A series of gunshots rang out again. During the whole process, Liang Yue changed magazines twice, and before the bullets in the third magazine were used up, the group of wargs surrounding everyone's trees had completely given up the ghost. One by one, they were directly headshot and killed by him. The bullets directly penetrated from the eyeball area, piercing their fragile blood vessels, nerves, and muscle tissue, and finally directly destroying their brains. That tough wolf skin, thick muscles, and bones that pistol bullets couldn't penetrate, became a pile of decorations in front of Liang Yue. Sure enough, no matter how fierce a creature looks on the outside, as long as its weakness is caught, it can easily be taken down in a targeted manner. So, at least from the current stage, the eyeball is still a common weakness of almost all biological species. As long as the technology is used properly, even the weakest pistol can deal a one-hit kill damage. Whoosh, 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 whoosh. Just as Liang Yue was still savoring the pros and cons of this short sniping in his mind, the sound of air being pierced suddenly rang in his ears almost subconsciously. This guy shrunk his head, and at the same time, with a thought, a large shield instantly appeared in his hand. Talk. The powerful arrows hit the shield, failing to penetrate the thick wood, but the accuracy of the orc riders shooting arrows below slightly surprised Liang Yue. Not bad. As expected of a race known for its aggression, even ordinary warg riders are so skilled. In terms of archery skills alone, they are much stronger than me. While sighing in his heart, Liang Yue also took the time to glance at the little hobbit on the other side. However, his worries were obviously unnecessary. Unlike his carelessness, being able to be distracted in the middle of a battle, Bilbo Baggins next to him, or rather, the others in the team, were always in a state of nervous tension, always paying attention to the movements of the orcs. When Liang Yue solved the wolf pack under the tree in one breath, although the others suddenly felt a lot easier in their hearts, they were still paying attention to the enemy's reaction when they saw the orc riders drawing their bows and knocking arrows, launching a retaliatory shooting at their side. They immediately hid themselves behind the tree trunks beside them. As a result, after this round of arrow rain, only Liang Yue, relying on his good equipment and the convenience of instant equipment changes, withstood a wave bullying people too much. Swinging his long sword, and brushing off the arrows stuck on the shield, Liang Yue then pressed his twitching eyes. And then just as he was about to jump down from the big tree to fight the orcs to the death, an unexpected situation suddenly occurred. But this time the accident was a good thing. Whoosh, whoosh, ugh, whoosh, woo. One after another gray shadows suddenly flew from the big trees on the side of the battlefield. The target was towards the orc riders. The frequency of the arrow shooting was not too fast, about 2 or 3 arrows per second, but the accuracy was extremely high. Each arrow shot could accurately take away the orc on the back of a warg, either a headshot or a throat pierce, immediately causing no small amount of chaos among the orcs. At the same time, the dwarves on this side were all excited, cheering unconsciously. Thinking that their reinforcements had arrived, Liang Yue saw it clearly. Relying on his superb eyesight, he instantly followed the direction of the arrow shooting, and captured a tall figure under the shadow covered by a piece of tree branch. Looks a little familiar. This thought flashed through his mind, but then this guy didn't think much about it, glanced at the sword and shield in his hand, and hesitated a little with a turn of his mind. he exchanged for a sniper rifle from the storage space. Orcs can wait until later to farm Azog. This elite boss monster must also be kept to bring the army over again, but that white warg king Kaka. He quickly loaded the bullet and placed one foot on a tree branch in front of him with a turn of the gun. Liang Yue, relying on his honed skills, accurately aimed at the wolf king on the opposite side. Bang! Without any hesitation, after a muffled gunshot, the golden bullet casing instantly ejected from the chamber. At the same time, the white-furred wolf king, who seemed to have realized that a great disaster was imminent and wanted to dodge quickly, still couldn't avoid the fate of being headshot. With a muffled sound, a stream of blood spurted out from the wolf king's exploded eye socket. The tall and well-built body then fell softly to the ground, and Azog, the orc leader riding on its back, also stumbled and rolled to the ground. In order to ensure the aesthetics of his trophy, Liang Yue still adopted the tactic of shooting at a vital point of the eyeball, preserving the integrity of the wolf king's corpse to the greatest extent. I wonder if the bullet can penetrate the warg's hard skull if I use this sniper rifle to shoot. The moment this thought arose in his mind, Liang Yue clearly captured a scene of an arrow piercing through a warg's skull in front of him, stunning the beast on the spot. With the death of the white-furred wolf king, Azog rolling to the ground, and orcs being constantly shot to death, the dwarves suddenly became high-spirited. Led by Thorin, they quickly slid down the tree trunks, raising their weapons and charging towards the chaotic orcs. At the same time, the archer, who was constantly shooting from the side, slowly emerged from the shadows and jumped from one tree branch to another. The arrows in her hand never stopped firing under the moonlight. The silvery moonlight outlined her beautiful face with just one glance. Liang Yue recognized this elven woman dressed in brown leather armor. At this moment, her figure appeared very agile. Two slender fingers clamped an arrow from behind. Then she knocked the arrow, drew the bow, and shot. The whole process was done in one go, gentle with a hint of elegance, but also very swift. An arrow shot out, and in the blink of an eye, the arrowhead directly pierced into the skull of a warg. As expected, archers have always been overpowered. The people are indeed telling the truth. Speaking of which, it's not like I haven't touched the standard elven longbow. The elasticity of the bowstring is just like that. Could it be that this race's arrows have the legendary armor-piercing function? While his mind was wandering, Liang Yue's movements were not slow at all. With a flip of his sleeve, the sniper rifle in his hand was instantly switched to an assault rifle, and with a movement of the muzzle, he instantly aimed at the orcs dozens of meters away. Pa! Pa pa! Pa pa pa! A series of gunshots rang out in the dark night, and as blood splattered, the orc riders fell from their wargs one by one. In just a few breaths, more than a dozen orc riders had been headshot and killed by Liang Yue. With the brain splattering, a sense of panic began to spread among the crowd, and it continued to intensify as more and more of their people died. The dwarves, led by Thorin, had also collided with them, and the sounds of hacking and killing slowly became louder. And under Liang Yue's deliberate care, most of the orcs who tried to launch an offensive against Thorin and the others were almost all shot dead in the first instance, well, except for Azog. Moreover, this orc brother, who was crowned with the title of Destroyer, was actually very cunning. After rolling to the ground, he never got up again. Using the cover of his people and the wargs, he always hid himself in the shadows, and as the number of deaths continued to increase, the mentality of the remaining orc riders in the lower ranks was rapidly changing. Soon, the first deserter turned the warg he was riding and began to flee into the forest. Then, under the lead of the example, the second, the third, then, Azog, who had already noticed that the situation was not good, jumped directly onto the back of a warg. Withdraw! The low voice sounded again, full of resentment. Before leading the troops away, Azog turned his head and looked at Liang Yue and the elven woman in the other direction. For a while he opened his mouth, as if wanting to say some harsh words, but before he could start, an arrow was directly stuffed into his mouth. After dodging this arrow sideways, the orc leader finally lost the interest in talking nonsense, and urged the warg under him hatefully, and then quickly disappeared into the darkness. A moment later, when everything had settled down, all that was left on the battlefield were about 60 or 70 corpses of orcs and wargs. Among them, the white-furred warg king was naturally the biggest gain among all the kill targets in this battle. If it weren't for the arrival of the elven woman, Liang Yue would have definitely rushed up at the first moment after getting off the tree to process the corpse of this wolf king. End of this chapter. Thank you so much for reading until the end. Don't forget to give it a like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription or donation encourages us to continue. Thank you all. See you in the next video.